My stepfather called me while I was thousands of miles away to brag that he had sold my grandfather's cabin to pay off his gambling debts. He laughed when he told me, thinking I was just a powerless girl who filed papers for a living. He had no idea he was actually stealing from a forensic accountant who hunts financial criminals for Fortune 500 companies. When I told him I was coming home, he told me not to bother, but he did not know I was coming back to foreclose on his entire life. Before I tell you how I turned his greed into my greatest payday, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who they were messing with. I was standing knee-deep in the red clay mud of a remote village in Ghana when the satellite phone in my pocket vibrated. The humidity was suffocating, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned offices I usually inhabited, but I was here overseeing the financial auditing of a charity project. I wiped my muddy hands on my cargo pants and answered. The connection crackled, but Marcus' voice came through clear and smug. Nia, honey, I have some news. I just closed a deal on that old cabin of yours in the Blue Ridge Mountains, sold it for $150,000 cash. I stood perfectly still as the world around me seemed to tilt. That cabin was not his to sell. It was the deed my grandfather had put in my name alone before he passed. Marcus continued without waiting for a response, his tone casual like he was discussing the weather. I had some debts to clear up, you know how it is. The Lord provides, and today He provided through you. Consider it your contribution to the family that raised you. I did not scream. I did not cry. My voice dropped to a register that would have terrified my corporate clients. You sold my property. Did you forge my signature, Marcus? His laugh grated against my ear, dismissive and arrogant. Do not be dramatic, Nia. Your mother signed for you. As the head of this household, I make the financial decisions. Women handle the pen, men handle the vision. Besides, what were you doing with it anyway? It was just sitting there gathering dust while I needed liquidity. The buyer is a group called Titan Holdings. They paid cash, no questions asked. It is done. Now do not rush back. We will send you a little something for your trouble when the dust settles. He hung up before I could say another word, leaving me standing in the silence of the Ghanaian afternoon, the phone gripping tight in my hand. He thought the conversation was over. He had no idea he had just confessed to a felony. I lowered the satellite phone slowly, my hand steady despite the rage boiling beneath my skin. The humid air of the Ghanaian afternoon felt heavy against my face, but inside I felt a cold clarity settling in. My colleague Kwame, who had been watching me from a few feet away, stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. He had seen people receive bad news before out here in the field, usually involving sick relatives or funding cuts. He expected tears, or maybe a frantic shout. He expected the Nia he knew, the quiet, diligent volunteer who spent her days auditing receipts for water wells. Instead, I simply stared at the device in my hand, as if it were a piece of evidence at a crime scene. Is everything all right, Nia? He asked, his voice tentative. I looked up at him and forced a small, tight smile that did not reach my eyes. Everything is perfectly fine, Kwame. My stepfather just made the biggest mistake of his life. I walked back toward the makeshift command tent, my boots squelching in the mud. 10 years ago, a call like that would have broken me. I remembered the distinct physical sensation of helplessness. I remembered being 22, sitting on the floor of my dorm room, weeping into the phone while my mother explained that the money for my final semester was gone because Marcus had an investment opportunity he just could not pass up. She had asked me to be understanding. She had asked me to be a good daughter. Back then, I was powerless. I was just the stepdaughter who was expected to sacrifice, expected to shrink so they could expand. They still saw that girl when they thought of me. They saw the quiet, obedient Nia who wore thrift store clothes and drove a dented sedan. They did not know the woman I had become. They did not know that the quiet clerk facade was a carefully constructed shield protecting a predator they were not equipped to handle. In my world, weakness was a liability I had purged long ago. I was not just a numbers girl. I was a hunter. I tracked hidden assets for a living. I found the money men thought they had buried. I destroyed lives with a spreadsheet and a subpoena. Marcus thought he was playing a game of checkers with a child, but he had just sat down at a chessboard with a grandmaster. I entered the tent, and the change in my demeanor was instant. The charitable volunteer vanished, replaced by the senior forensic accountant, who had brought down Ponzi schemes and exposed corporate embezzlement rings. I sat at my desk and opened my secure laptop, the screen glowing blue in the dim light. I did not log back into the charity database. Instead, I opened a secure communication channel. I typed a single command to my personal assistant in New York. Prepare the jet. I am coming home. Immediately. The response pinged back within seconds. Destination Atlanta, I typed. And David, clear my schedule for the next week. I have a family matter to settle. I closed the laptop and stood up. The air in the tent felt different now, charged with the static of impending violence, not physical but financial. Marcus thought he had taken my sanctuary. He had no idea that by selling that cabin he had not just sold a building, he had sold his own future. It was time to go back to Atlanta. It was time to show my family exactly what happens when you steal from the person who holds the receipts. I sat down at the rickety desk in my tent and pulled my laptop from its shock-proof case. To my stepfather Marcus and my mother Vivian, I was just Nia, the administrative assistant, who drove a 10-year-old Honda and wore clothes from the discount rack. They thought my job involved filing invoices and making coffee for people who actually mattered. They did not know that the laptop in front of me required a fingerprint and a retinal scan to open because it contained sensitive financial data for 3 of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. I am not a clerk. I am a senior forensic accountant. I do not just balance books, I dissect them. I hunt down embezzled funds for Fortune 500 companies, and I find assets that billionaires try to hide from the government. My hourly rate is higher than what Marcus makes in a month of his scams. The screen hummed to life, glowing with the interface of my proprietary tracking software. I did not need to wait for a flight to Atlanta to start my war. I logged into the Blue Ridge County Land Registry system, bypassing the public portal and accessing the back-end data through a secure channel I used for investigations. My fingers flew across the keyboard. It took me less than 60 seconds to pull up the deed transfer. There it was in black and white. The property that my grandfather had built with his own hands, the sanctuary where I had spent my happiest childhood summers, had been sold for pennies on the dollar. But it was the buyer line that caught my attention. Titan Holdings, LLC. A cold smile touched my lips, and LLC was the amateur move of someone trying to hide a paper trail. Marcus likely thought the generic name would protect the identity of whoever he was dealing with, or perhaps he was even trying to hide his own involvement in the kickbacks. He did not realize that piercing corporate veils was literally my day job. To the average person, Titan Holdings LLC was a dead end. To me, it was a loose thread waiting to be pulled. I memorized the registration number and closed the window. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed a number that very few people possessed. It rang once before a deep professional voice answered. "This is Julian." I did not waste time with pleasantries. "Julian, it is Nia. I need a full corporate forensic workup on a Georgia entity called Titan Holdings, LLC. I want to know who the registered agent is, who the signatories are, and where their funding originates. And Julian, I need it done quietly. I do not want to spook the prey just yet." I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. My stepfather just sold them my property with a forged signature. This is not just business anymore. It is a demolition project. Julian did not ask questions. He simply said, "Consider it done." I ended the call and looked at the screen one last time. Marcus had started a game he did not understand. He thought he had cashed out. He was about to find out that he had just written a check his life could not cash. I sat in the dim light of the command tent and let the memory wash over me. I did not summon it to wallow in pain, but to sharpen my resolve. It was exactly 10 years ago. I was 22 years old and clutching an acceptance letter to my dream graduate program. It was my escape hatch, my ticket out of the suffocating house where my mother worshipped a man who saw us as nothing more than assets to be liquidated. I had gone to the bank to withdraw the deposit fee money I had scraped together from tutoring and waitressing. The teller had looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pity before sliding a transaction slip across the counter. The balance was zero. I remembered running home, my chest heaving with panic. I found Marcus in the living room watching football, his feet propped up on the coffee table. When I screamed at him asking where my money was, he did not even look away from the television. He told me he had borrowed it. He said he had a feeling about a poker game, a sure thing that was going to double our fortune. He had gambled away my education on a hand of cards and lost. I remembered falling to my knees on the carpet, begging my mother to say something, to do something. Vivian had just stood there wiping down the kitchen counter, refusing to meet my eyes. She told me I was being selfish. She said that as a family, we supported the head of the household, and that my education could wait, but Marcus's reputation could not. I spent that night crying until I was sick, physically ill from the betrayal. I spent the next 4 years working double shifts, sleeping 3 hours a night and eating scraps just to claw my way back to zero. But the girl who cried on the kitchen floor was dead. She died the moment I realized that tears were a currency Marcus did not value. I stood up and walked to the map of the world pinned to the canvas wall of the tent. I traced the line from Accra to Atlanta. This time I would not be the victim. I would be the architect of his ruin. I pulled up my travel app on my secure phone. I did not book the economy seat that Nia, the struggling clerk, would have bought. I booked a first-class suite on the next flight out. I used a shell account so my name would not appear on any public manifest. I needed the element of surprise. Marcus expected a hysterical girl coming home to beg for clarity. He was going to get a forensic auditor coming home to seize his life. I started calculating the angles. If he sold the cabin for $150,000 in cash, he was trying to hide the transaction from the IRS. That was tax evasion. If he forged my signature, that was fraud. If he used the money to pay off illegal gambling debts, that was money laundering. I was not just going to sue him. I was going to construct a cage around him made of his own crimes, and I was going to let him lock himself inside. I packed my bag with precise efficiency. I included the clothes I wore in my cover life, the boring beige cardigans and the scuffed shoes that made me look like the struggling stepdaughter they loved to pity. I would wear their low expectations like armor. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my computer. The eyes staring back were not the eyes of a daughter. They were the eyes of an executioner. I was coming home, Marcus, and this time I was holding all the cards. I settled into the plush leather seat of the first-class cabin, a glass of sparkling water untouched on the side table. To the flight attendants, I was just another tired business traveler burying herself in work. They did not know that the woman in seat 2A was currently dismantling her stepfather's financial life from 30,000 feet. I had specifically requested that my name be kept off the public passenger manifest, a perk of the elite status I held under my professional identity. Marcus and Vivian thought I was scrambling to find a cheap flight home, probably crying in a middle seat near the back of the plane. The reality was far colder and far more dangerous. I opened my laptop and connected to the plane encrypted Wi-Fi network. It was time to look under the hood of Marcus' finances. I accessed a proprietary database that aggregated credit reports, bank statements, and public records, linking them through social security numbers and known addresses. Marcus thought he was clever hiding his gambling debts in the shadows, but money always leaves a trail. It did not take long to find the hemorrhage. His credit cards were maxed out, the minimum payments missed for 3 consecutive months. There were liens on his car and a second mortgage on the house that my mother likely knew nothing about. But the real smoking gun was in his bank activity. I traced a series of large cash withdrawals over the past 6 months, always from ATMs near a specific industrial park in Buckhead. I cross-referenced the location with police reports and underground chatter. It was a known hub for high-stakes illegal poker games run by a syndicate that did not send collection agencies when you defaulted. They sent men with baseball bats. I dug deeper, running his name through a shadow database of known gambling debtors. The result made my blood run cold. Marcus owed $200,000 to a loan shark named Silas. The debt had been called in last week. I sat back in my seat, the hum of the engines suddenly loud in my ears. The math was terrifyingly simple. Marcus had sold my cabin for $150,000. He owed $200,000. He was $50,000 short. He had sold my sanctuary not to clear his debt, but to buy himself a few more weeks of breathing room. And by forging my signature on the deed, he had made me an accessory to his desperation. If Silas came looking for the rest of his money, and Marcus could not pay, he might point the sharks in my direction, claiming I had the rest of the proceeds. He had not just stolen my property, he had painted a target on my back. I looked out the window at the clouds stretching below me, a white blanket hiding the turbulent world beneath. Marcus was not just a thief. He was a drowning man pulling everyone around him down into the abyss. He thought the sale of the cabin was his lifeline. He did not realize it was the anchor that was going to sink him. I closed my laptop, my fingers tracing the cold metal of the case. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was sacrificing a pawn to save his king. He did not know that the pawn had already crossed the board and become a queen. I was not coming home to save him. I was coming home to make sure that when he went down alone. I pulled up the file on Titan Holdings LLC again. If Marcus was desperate enough to sell to them for cash, they were likely connected to Silas. The web was tightening, and I was the only one with the scissors to cut myself free. I ordered a coffee black. I needed to be sharp when I landed. The game was about to begin. The automatic doors of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport slid open, and the humid Georgia air hit me like a physical weight. It was a different kind of heat than the one I had left in Ghana. This air was thick with exhaust fumes and the frenetic energy of a city that never really stopped moving. I stepped onto the curb and pulled my phone from my pocket to check the screen. It was blank. There were no missed calls and no text messages asking if I had landed safely. No one was circling the arrivals terminal waiting for me. My mother knew my flight schedule and Marcus knew I was coming home, but to them I was just Nia, the inconvenience. I was the daughter who was returning to complain about a business decision she was supposedly too simple to understand. Their silence was not an oversight, it was a message. You are on your own. I did not call them and I did not beg for a ride. I opened my rideshare app and requested a standard car. I could have summoned a luxury black car with a single tap of my corporate account, but I needed to stay in character. I was supposed to be the struggling administrative assistant. I was the poor relation who needed charity. I threw my battered duffel bag into the trunk of a dented Toyota Camry and gave the driver my mother's address. The ride was a blur of highway overpasses and billboards, but my mind was laser-focused on the forensic profile I had built on the flight. Marcus was $200,000 in the hole to a loan shark. He had liquidated my assets to stop the bleeding. Or so I had assumed. We turned onto the tree-lined street where my mother had lived for 20 years. The lawns were manicured and the hedges were trimmed to military precision. It was a neighborhood built on appearances where debt was hidden behind oak doors and leases were passed off as ownership. As we approached the house, I leaned forward and my breath caught in my throat. I expected to see Marcus's old sedan or maybe a rental if his car had been repossessed. I did not expect to see a gleaming silver monument to stupidity parked right in front of the garage. It was a brand new Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The paint was so fresh it looked wet under the afternoon sun. A paper temporary dealer tag fluttered in the rear window. I stared at it, and the forensic accountant in me did the math instantly. That car cost at least $100,000. Marcus owed $200,000 to violent criminals. He had sold my cabin for $150,000. Instead of paying off the people who could break his legs, he had taken my money and bought a luxury car. He had chosen vanity over survival. He was not just a thief. He was a man so addicted to the illusion of wealth that he would risk his life and mine just to look rich for the neighbors. I paid the driver and stepped onto the pavement. The heat radiating off the asphalt matched the cold fury rising in my chest. He had stolen my grandfather's legacy to buy a hood ornament. He had taken the proceeds of a felony and parked them in the driveway for the world to envy. It was the most reckless financial suicide note I had ever seen. I gripped the handle of my bag until my knuckles turned white. He wanted to look like a king. I was going to make sure he lost his crown. I dragged my battered duffel bag up the brick steps of the porch, my body aching from the 30-hour journey. The humidity clung to my skin, and the red dust of Ghana still stained the hem of my cargo pants. I reached for the doorbell, but the door swung open before I could touch it. It was not my mother who stood there, and it was not Marcus. It was Amber, my stepbrother Darius' wife. She was leaning against the doorframe, blocking my path with a posture of practiced indifference. She held a green juice in one hand, and her other hand rested on her hip, fingers splayed to display a massive stone that caught the afternoon light. Amber was the kind of woman who treated life like a curated social media feed. She was wearing a matching designer athleisure set that cost more than she claimed to make in a week as a freelance lifestyle coach. Her blonde hair was blown out to perfection, a sharp contrast to my own hair, which I had tied back in a practical messy bun for fieldwork. She looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling slightly, as if I brought a bad smell with me from the continent. "Oh, Nia, you are back," she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she reserved for people she considered beneath her. She made no move to help me with my bag or step aside to let me in. "Darius told me you were off finding yourself in the jungle or something. It looks like it was intense. I hope you managed to find some running water over there. Your hair looks so natural. It is very brave of you to go out like that." It was a classic Amber comment, a microaggression, wrapped in a compliment designed to remind me of my place. To her, I was the unkempt stepsister, the one who did not know how to present herself in polite society. She thought my appearance was a result of poverty and ignorance, not a choice made for utility in a combat zone of financial crime. I looked at her calm and unblinking. I did not apologize for my appearance, and I did not smooth my hair self-consciously as she expected. Instead, my gaze dropped to her left hand. She noticed my attention and immediately brought the hand up to her chest, feigning a gasp, but clearly intending to show off the ring. "Oh, this," she giggled, wiggling her fingers. "Marcus and Darius surprised me with it yesterday. An early anniversary gift. Isn't it breathtaking?" It was huge, a cushion-cut stone surrounded by a halo of smaller gems. It was meant to look like a $50,000 diamond, but to a forensic accountant who had spent years authenticating assets seized from fraudsters, it looked like exactly what it was. I met her eyes and gave her a small, pitying smile. "It is certainly big, Amber," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of malice. "The refractive index is fascinating. Cubic zirconia has come a long way in recent years, hasn't it? Although if they told you it was a diamond, you might want to check the receipt. Real diamonds do not cast rainbow reflections like that in direct sunlight." Amber's smile faltered, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. She looked down at the ring, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She wanted to scream that it was real, that I was just jealous, but the cold certainty in my voice silenced her. I picked up my bag and stepped forward, forcing her to scramble out of the way or be run over. "Excuse me," I said, brushing past her into the air-conditioned foyer. "I have a family reunion to attend." I stepped past Amber and into the living room, the air conditioning set to a bone-chilling 65 degrees that did nothing to cool the suffocating tension in the room. The house looked different than I remembered, not structurally, but cosmetically. It was filled with new objects, shiny distractions meant to cover the rot beneath the floorboards. Dominating the far wall was a monstrosity of a television screen, easily 85 inches of ultra-high-definition excess, that was currently displaying a violent video game. My stepbrother Darius was sprawled across the leather sectional, his feet propped up on the coffee table. He was 29 years old, but he still lived like a teenager with an unlimited allowance. He didn't even pause the game when I walked in. He just clicked the controller furiously, his eyes glued to the screen. "Hey, big sis," he muttered without looking at me. "Long flight, huh?" I looked at his feet. He was wearing a pair of limited edition Jordans that I knew retailed for over $1,000 on the resale market. They were brand new, pristine, and white. He was wearing my stolen inheritance on his feet while I stood there in my dust-covered work boots. I turned my gaze to the window where my mother Vivian was standing. She was aggressively fluffing the curtains, her back turned to me. She was a woman who had spent her entire life making herself small to fit into Marcus's ego, and right now she was trying to disappear completely. "Mom," I said, my voice flat. She flinched as if I had thrown something at her. She turned around slowly, her smile tight and trembling. "Nia, baby, you are home." She wiped her hands on her apron, but she did not come over to hug me. She did not ask how I was, or look me in the eye. She just kept glancing at the hallway as if waiting for permission to speak. The guilt was radiating off her in waves. She knew exactly what she had done. She had taken the pen Marcus handed her and signed away my property, my history, and her own integrity. Seeing her like this, so fearful and complicit, hurt more than the theft itself. Then the heavy oak door to the study opened and Marcus walked in. He was wearing a three-piece suit on a Tuesday afternoon, looking for all the world like the successful businessman he pretended to be at church. He spread his arms wide, a gesture of expansive, benevolent fatherhood that made my stomach turn. "There she is," he boomed, his voice filling the room. "The prodigal daughter returns from saving the world. Come, give your old man a hug." He acted as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't called me days ago to gloat about selling my property. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He wanted me to fall in line to play the role of the grateful, submissive daughter so he could maintain his delusion of control. I did not move. I did not smile. I just watched him cataloging the silk tie, the gold watch, and the smell of expensive scotch on his breath. He was not a father greeting a child. He was a con artist greeting a mark. And he had no idea the mark had come to collect. I stepped sideways, avoiding Marcus' embrace completely, leaving him hugging the empty air. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as I locked eyes with him. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply asked the question that was hanging in the air like smoke. "Where is the money, Marcus? Where is the $150,000 you stole from me?" Marcus dropped his hands and adjusted his silk tie, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he smoothed it back into that mask of benevolent patriarch. He chuckled, shaking his head as if dealing with a petulant child who did not understand how the adult world worked. "Naya, honey, you have to stop thinking so small. That money is not sitting in a savings account earning pennies. I put it to work. I invested it. It is seed capital for Darius' business. We are building generational wealth here." I looked over at Darius, who was still sprawled on the couch. He sat up now, grinning with a confidence that was entirely unearned. "That is right, sis," he said. "Dad put it all into crypto for me. We are getting in on the ground floor of a new coin. It is going to the moon. I am going to double that money in 6 months, maybe triple it." I stared at them, my face a mask of stone. They were lying. I knew for a fact Marcus owed $200,000 to a loan shark. He hadn't invested a dime in crypto. He had likely handed most of the cash to a man named Silas in a back alley, just to keep his legs broken, and spent the rest on the car outside to keep up appearances. But the audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They were using my stolen inheritance to fund a fantasy while claiming they were doing me a favor. "And what do you know about cryptocurrency?" "Darius," I asked quietly, "do you even know what a blockchain is?" Darius rolled his eyes and let out a scoffing laugh. "Oh, please, Nia. Stick to what you know, okay? You are a bookkeeper. You file receipts and count petty cash for a living. You make what, 40,000 a year pushing paper. You do not have the mindset for high-level investing. This is the big leagues. Leave the financial strategy to the men of the house. You will thank us when we are all rich." My mother Vivian nodded eagerly from the corner, desperate to believe the lie. "Yes. Nia, listen to your brother. Darius has such a head for business. He is going to take care of all of us. You should be grateful your father is looking out for the family future instead of letting that old cabin rot." It was a masterclass in delusion. Darius, the man who had failed out of community college twice, was lecturing me on finance. Me, a woman who is currently leading a forensic audit of a multinational banking conglomerate. A woman who could trace a wire transfer through 3 different tax havens before Darius could even tie his expensive new shoes. They thought I was the family charity case. They had no idea I was the only one in the room who wasn't bankrupt. I looked at Marcus, who was beaming with pride at his son's ignorance. They were not just thieves, they were amateurs, and I was done playing their game. I reached into the pocket of my worn cargo pants. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the car key. It belonged to a rented Honda Civic, a dented gray sedan with a missing hubcap and a check engine light that had been on since 2015. I had parked it down the street so they would see it later, a physical prop in the performance of my supposed poverty. I pulled the key out and slammed it onto the glass coffee table. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the silent room, causing my mother to jump and Darius to finally look away from his video game. I looked at each of them, in turn letting my gaze linger on the expensive shoes, the jewelry, the new furniture bought with my stolen future. I spoke slowly, my voice trembling just enough to sell the desperation, but underneath it was the steel of a final warning. You think this is a joke? You think you can just take what belongs to me and call it an investment? That cabin was not just property, it was my grandfather's legacy, and it was the only thing I had. I took a breath, steadying myself against the wave of their collective indifference. "I am giving you a choice, Marcus. You have exactly 3 days, 72 hours. You either return the $150,000 to my account, or you reverse the sale and get the deed back in my name. If you do not, I will go to the authorities. I will hire a lawyer. I will use every legal avenue available to me to destroy you." Silence hung in the room for a heartbeat. Then Marcus started to chuckle. It started as a low rumble in his chest and grew into a full-bellied laugh that shook his frame. He slapped his knee, wiping a tear from his eye as he looked at Darius. "Did you hear that, son? Your sister is going to hire a lawyer. With what money, Nia? Are you going to pay them in food stamps? Are you going to barter with your old clothes? Lawyers cost hundreds of dollars an hour. You cannot even afford to fix the air conditioning in your car." Amber joined in her giggle, high and piercing. "Oh, honey, do not be embarrassing. Legal action is for people who can afford retainers, not people who shop at Goodwill. You really should just be grateful we are letting you stay here. You look like you need a shower and a hot meal, not a lawsuit." Even my mother Vivian shook her head, looking at me with disappointed pity. "Nia, stop this nonsense. You cannot sue your own father. It is a sin. Just let the men handle the business. You are making a fool of yourself." The laughter swelled around me, a chorus of cruelty that filled the high ceilings of the house. They were laughing at the clerk. They were laughing at the failure. They did not see the predator standing in their living room, memorizing their faces and calculating their destruction. I picked up the key and turned toward the door. Laugh while you can, I thought, because in 3 days I am going to burn this whole house of cards to the ground. Sunday morning in Atlanta was a performance art, and Greater Hope Baptist Church was the main stage. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and old Bibles. I sat in the third pew, squeezed between a woman in a hat the size of a satellite dish and my mother, who was weeping softly into a lace handkerchief. She was putting on a show for the neighbors, playing the role of the long-suffering matriarch. But the real star of the show was up on the pulpit. Marcus stood behind the polished oak podium, gripping the microphone like a rock star. As the head deacon, he commanded the room with a charisma that almost made you forget he was a thief. He wore a cream-colored suit that I knew cost $3,000 because I had seen the charge on his credit card statement the night before. He looked holy. He looked righteous. And he was about to weaponize God against me. He started low, his voice, a rumbling baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. Brothers and sisters, we talk often about the prodigal son. We talk about forgiveness. We talk about the open arms of the father. But we rarely talk about the heart of the child who returns. The congregation murmured their agreement, a chorus of amens rippling through the sanctuary. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto me. Sometimes the child does not return for love. Sometimes they do not return for redemption. Sometimes they return because they smell the fatted calf and they want their cut. The air in the church shifted. Necks craned, paper fans stopped waving. Everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. I was the stranger in their midst, the stepdaughter who had been gone for years and had suddenly reappeared looking ragged and poor. To them, I was the failure who had come crawling back to beg for money from the successful businessman. Marcus continued, his voice rising in volume and pitch. We have people in our own lives, people we fed and clothed, who come back only to demand what they did not earn. They look at the blessings of the righteous and call it unfair. They try to divide the house that faith built. But I tell you today that greed is a spirit that will not prosper here. My mother let out a loud sob, and Amber reached over to pat her hand, shooting a glare in my direction. The woman with the large hat shifted away from me as if poverty and ingratitude were contagious. I felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on my back, judging me, condemning me. They saw a woman in a plain cotton dress and scuffed flats. They saw a daughter disrespecting her father. They did not see the truth. They did not know that the man preaching about greed had stolen $150,000 from a child to pay a bookie. Most people would have shrunk under that pressure. They would have looked down at their hands or cried or run out of the church in shame. That was what Marcus wanted. He wanted to break me publicly, to use the social pressure of the church to force me into submission. But I did not shrink. I straightened my spine until it was a steel rod. I lifted my chin and stared directly into Marcus' eyes. I did not blink. I did not frown. I just looked at him with the cold, impassive gaze of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent tax return. I let him see that his words meant nothing to me. I let him see that while he had the pulpit, I had the evidence. His voice faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny stumble in his rhythm, as he realized I was not afraid. Preach on, Marcus, I thought. Enjoy your sermon. Because Judgment Day is coming, and it is not going to look like you think. The dining room table was groaning under the weight of a feast that my stolen money had purchased. Prime rib macaroni and cheese, collard greens, and crystal glasses filled with expensive wine. Marcus sat at the head of the table playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, while my mother, Vivian, fluttered around, ensuring everyone's glass was full. But the guest of honor was Pastor Jenkins, a man with a smile as oily as the gravy on his plate. He had been invited for one reason only: to sanctify the theft of my property. Marcus knew he could not beat me with logic, so he had brought in a spiritual hitman to bully me into submission. Pastor Jenkins wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were heavy with performative sorrow, the kind reserved for funerals and fundraising drives. Sister Nia, your father has shared with me the burden on his heart. He tells me you are struggling with the concept of family sacrifice. You know, the good book tells us to honor our father and mother. It does not say honor them only when it is convenient or profitable. It says honor them always. Sometimes a child must lay down their own desires for the good of the tribe. It is a holy thing to give so that the head of the house may lead. My mother nodded fervently from her seat, her eyes wide and pleading. She wanted me to accept this. She wanted me to believe that being robbed was actually a spiritual virtue. Darius smirked into his wineglass, enjoying the show. They all waited for me to bow my head and accept the shame. They expected the quiet clerk to crumble under the weight of religious authority. I slowly cut a piece of the prime rib. It was cooked perfectly rare. I chewed it thoroughly, taking my time, while the silence in the room stretched thin and tight. I swallowed and set my fork down with a deliberate click against the fine china. I looked Pastor Jenkins directly in the eye. "Pastor, I appreciate your counsel," I said, my voice smooth and deadly calm. "But I believe you are reading from an abridged version of the scripture. Because my Bible also says in Proverbs 28, verse 24, that whoever robs their father or mother and says it is not a transgression is the partner of a destroyer." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. Marcus choked on his wine, coughing violently into his napkin. My mother dropped a serving spoon, clattering loudly against a porcelain bowl. Pastor Jenkins froze his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening in shock. He had expected a lamb and found a wolf. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my gaze never leaving the pastor's face. And let us not forget, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. "For the love of money is the root of all evil." You are eating a steak bought with stolen money, Pastor. Does it taste like a blessing to you, or does it taste like a crime? I picked up my wine glass and took a sip, watching the color drain from the pastor's face. He suddenly seemed to lose his appetite, pushing his plate away as if the food had turned to ash. Marcus looked like he wanted to flip the table, but he was paralyzed, unable to explode in front of the man of God. I had neutralized his weapon. I had taken their holy war and turned it into a crusade for justice. The lunch was ruined, and I had never enjoyed a meal more. My mother cornered me in the kitchen while the men were still digesting their discomfort in the dining room. She grabbed my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong, her nails digging into my skin as she pulled me away from the door. Her eyes were wet with tears, but I knew the difference between genuine sorrow and the weaponized weeping she used to get her way. She had been doing this since I was a child, crying until I gave up my toys, gave up my allowance, gave up my boundaries just to make the noise stop. But I was not a child anymore, and her tears were no longer kryptonite. They were just salt water. "Nia, please," she hissed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice trembling with practiced desperation. "You have to stop this. You are upsetting your father. You are upsetting the pastor. Do you not have any shame? Look at what you are doing to this family. You are tearing us apart over a piece of land, a dusty old cabin in the woods that you barely visit. Is that property more important to you than your own flesh and blood?" She took a breath, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant to invoke a bond that she had broken years ago. "You know Darius needs this. He has such big dreams, Naya. He just needs a chance. A little seed money to get his feet on the ground. You are the big sister. It is your job to look out for him. It is your job to sacrifice so he can shine. That is what family does. We lift each other up. Why can you not just be happy that you were able to help him start his life? Why do you have to be so selfish and hold on to things you do not even need?" I looked down at her, at the woman who had birthed me, but had never protected me. She was talking about theft as if it were charity. She was framing my victimization as a failure of my character. It was gaslighting in its purest form, designed to make me question my own reality and feel guilty for being robbed. She wanted me to apologize for being the one they stole from. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. I stepped back, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not let her see any anger or hurt. I just gave her the cold, hard facts. "Stop talking, Mom. Just stop. You are twisting reality to suit your conscience, but I am not going to let you. This is not about Darius' dreams. This is about a crime. You keep saying Marcus sold the house. You keep saying he made a decision. But the deed required a signature from the owner. And since I was in Ghana, I could not have signed it." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that was far more terrifying than a scream. "Marcus did not just sell that house, Mom. Someone had to forge my name on the transfer documents. Someone had to stand in front of a notary and pretend to be me or bribe them to look the other way. Marcus told me you signed for me. He said women handle the pen. That means you are not just a bystander in this. You are not just the peacemaker trying to smooth things over. You committed forgery. You facilitated real estate fraud. In the eyes of the law, you are not a mother protecting her family. You are an accomplice to a felony. And if I decide to press charges, you will be the one in handcuffs right beside him, so do not talk to me about sacrifice. You sacrificed me to save yourself. I walked out of the kitchen and back into the lion's den of the living room, where the air was thick with judgment and cheap cologne. I wanted to leave to retreat to my war room and finalize the destruction of my stepfather's financial life, but Amber was holding court near the fireplace, and she had clearly decided that I was her entertainment for the afternoon. She was surrounded by 3 other women from the church, all of them wearing hats that cost more than my first car, and looking at me with that specific blend of pity and repulsion reserved for the poor relations of the parish. Amber saw me coming and raised her voice just enough to ensure the entire room could hear her concern. "Oh, Nia, come join us, we were just praying for you. It must be so hard being at your age without a husband or a real career to fall back on. Darius tells me you are still filing papers for that little accounting firm. Do they even offer health insurance? I worry about you out there all alone in that old car. You know, if you put a little more effort into your appearance, maybe bought some clothes that were not from a bin, someone might actually look twice at you. It is not too late to find a man, even in your tax bracket." The women tittered, covering their mouths with manicured hands. Amber beamed, satisfied with her strike. She wanted me to snap. She wanted the angry black woman trope to play out in front of the pastor so she could play the victim. I did not give her the satisfaction. I walked right up to her, invading her personal space, just enough to make her flinch. "I am doing just fine, Amber," I said, my voice cool and level. "My tax bracket is a little more complicated than you might think. But thank you for the prayers. I am sure you have plenty of other things to pray about, like depreciation." Amber's eyes narrowed. She did not understand the jab, but she knew she was being mocked. She lifted her left hand aggressively, thrusting the massive ring into my face. "Well, at least some of us are being taken care of. Look at this beauty." Marcus and Darius picked it out. 3 carats flawless clarity. It is an investment-grade diamond Naya, something to pass down to my children. It cost $50,000. Maybe one day, if you find a man who actually values you, you will know what this feels like. I looked down at the ring. I did not need a loupe to see the truth. I had spent 3 years auditing a jewelry conglomerate that was laundering money through synthetic stones. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I reached out and took her hand, holding it up to the light streaming through the window. The room went silent, waiting for my reaction. "It is certainly sparkly amber," I said loud enough for the back row to hear. "But you might want to have a word with Darius about his investment strategy. This is not a diamond, it is moissanite." Amber snatched her hand back, her face turning a violent shade of crimson. "You are lying. You are just jealous because you are broke." I shook my head calmly. Diamonds are singly refractive amber. When you look through the table of the stone, you should see singular facets. Your stone is showing double refraction. See how the facet edges look doubled like a blurry photograph. That is a physical property of silicon carbide, not carbon. And that rainbow dispersion fire. It is too high for a diamond. It is a dead giveaway. That ring did not cost $50,000. It cost maybe $800 retail. Whoever sold it to Marcus saw him coming a mile away. Or maybe Marcus knew exactly what he was buying and kept the difference. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Amber looked down at her hand, horror dawning in her eyes. She looked across the room at Marcus, who was suddenly very interested in his shoes. The church ladies leaned in, staring at the ring with new critical eyes. I had not just insulted her jewelry, I had exposed the cheap reality behind their facade of wealth. I smiled a genuine shark-like smile. "Nice costume jewelry, though. It goes with the outfit." I turned and walked away, leaving her staring at her hand, wondering just how much of her life was a lie. I left my mother's house with the sound of their derision ringing in my ears. I told them I had found a cheap motel room near the airport, something with flickering neon signs, and questionable stains on the carpet because that was all I could afford. Darius had snorted and told me to watch out for bedbugs while Amber had offered me a bottle of hand sanitizer with a look of pure disgust. I let them believe it. I let them think I was retreating to squalor to lick my wounds. It made them feel powerful, and when people feel powerful, they get sloppy. Once I was safely around the corner and out of sight, I did not call a cab. I tapped the app on my secure phone and summoned my usual driver. A black SUV with tinted windows glided to the curb 3 minutes later. The driver nodded respectfully as he took my battered duffel bag, which contained $100,000 worth of surveillance tech, disguised as old clothes. "Take me to the residence," I said. We drove away from the suffocating suburbs and toward the gleaming skyline of Buckhead. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was smooth and silent. I keyed in my access code and the heavy doors slid open to reveal my sanctuary. It was not a motel room. It was the penthouse suite of one of the most exclusive residential towers in Atlanta. I kept this place under a shell company for exactly these kinds of operations. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city that Marcus desperately wanted to own, but could never afford. The air was cool and smelled of white tea and expensive leather. I kicked off my scuffed flats and walked barefoot across the marble floors, feeling the tension of the day begin to bleed away. But I was not here to relax. I was here to work. I walked into the main living area, which I had converted into a temporary command center. I opened my duffel bag and began to assemble my war room. I set up 3 high-definition monitors on the glass dining table, connecting them to my military-grade laptop. Cables snaked across the surface like veins pumping data into the heart of my operation. I logged into my forensic accounting dashboard, and the screens hummed to life, washing the room in a cold blue glow. On the left screen, I pulled up Marcus' complete credit history, real-time banking alerts, and the GPS tracker I had digitally tagged to his phone number. On the right screen, I mapped out the shell structure of Titan Holdings LLC and its connections to the local underworld. In the center screen, I brought up the feed from the hidden cameras I had planted in my mother's house years ago during a Christmas visit, just in case. I saw them in the living room laughing, drinking wine paid for with my money, oblivious to the sword hanging over their heads. They thought I was crying in a dark room, smelling of mildew. They did not know I was sitting in the sky watching their every move like a god. I poured myself a glass of vintage Pinot Noir and sat back in the ergonomic chair. The hunt was on. I sat in the cool glow of my monitors, sipping my wine, when a notification pinged on my burner phone. It was a Google alert I had set up for my own name, a habit from my line of work. This hit was not a corporate filing or a court docket. It was a Facebook post from the private group Buckhead Ladies Who Lunch. I clicked the link and there was Amber, face perfectly filtered and teary-eyed, staring back at me. She had posted a long, emotional diatribe. I leaned in, reading the text aloud to the empty room, my voice dripping with sarcasm. The headline read, "Heartbroken by toxic family drama. Please pray for us." It started with a photo of her hand clutching a Bible, the fake diamond ring front and center. "I usually keep my private life private," she wrote, which was a lie considering she documented her breakfast every morning. "But I am under spiritual attack. My husband's stepsister, Nia, just returned from Africa, and instead of bringing peace, she has brought chaos into our home." I scrolled down, and it got worse. We welcomed her with open arms, despite her aggression and her unkempt appearance. We tried to share our blessings with her. Marcus and Darius have been nothing but generous, even investing on her behalf. But she is demanding money she did not earn, threatening to sue her own father, and attacking my character. She even made fun of my engagement ring out of pure jealousy. It is so sad to see someone so broken by poverty that they cannot celebrate success. Please pray for her heart to be softened, and for our safety, as she has been very volatile. The comments were pouring in. Hundreds of wealthy, bored women in Atlanta were eating it up. "So brave of you to share," Amber, one wrote. "Stay safe, hun. Jealousy is an ugly disease," wrote another. "Maybe she picked up some bad energy over there in the jungle," said a third. They were painting me as a savage, a bitter, poor relation coming to destroy their civilized happiness. Amber was basking in the attention, replying to every comment, with prayer hand emojis, and more lies about my instability. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and let out a laugh that echoed off the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was not a bitter laugh. It was the laugh of a hunter watching a prey animal walk voluntarily into a trap. Amber thought she was destroying my reputation. She thought she was isolating me socially. In reality, she was handing me a documented timeline of defamation. She was creating a public record of their lies. Every share, every comment was just more fuel for the fire I was about to light. She wanted to play the victim in the court of public opinion. I was preparing to be the prosecutor in a court of law. I took a screenshot of the post, and every single comment, then saved them to a folder labeled Evidence. "Go ahead, Amber," I whispered to the screen. "Keep talking. You are just digging the grave deeper, and I have plenty of dirt to fill it in." The notifications on my old personal phone number, which I had kept active only for emergencies, began to light up the dark room. It started with a text from unexpected sources, people I had not spoken to since high school or college. These were the daughters of the Atlanta elite, the women who lunched with Amber and attended the same charity galas as my mother. They had seen the post, and like sharks scenting blood in the water, they were circling. First it was Candace, a girl I used to tutor in calculus. Her message popped up on the screen, glowing with self-righteous indignation. I saw Amber's post. "Nia, I cannot believe you would come back after all this time just to cause trouble. Your father is a pillar of this community. You should be ashamed of yourself for attacking him over money." Then came a message from Jasmine, a former neighbor. "I always knew you were jealous of your sister, but this is low even for you. Your poor mother is heartbroken. We are all praying for your soul." The messages kept coming, a barrage of judgment from people who knew nothing about my life or the crimes being committed under their noses. They swallowed Amber's narrative whole because it fit their worldview. In their world, parents were saints and children who asked questions were ungrateful rebels. They saw a woman in cheap clothes fighting with a man in a $3,000 suit, and they instinctively sided with the suit. 10 years ago, I would have typed out long, desperate paragraphs trying to explain myself. I would have sent screenshots of the forged deed. I would have begged them to see my side, to understand that I was the victim. But I was not 22 anymore. I was not looking for validation from people whose moral compass pointed whichever way the money flowed. I did not type a single word in response. I did not defend myself. I simply swiped left and hit block. Candace, block. Jasmine, block. The entire high school cheerleading squad, block. With each tap of my finger, I severed a tie to a past that no longer served me. It was surgical, and it was silent. I did not need their friendship, and I certainly did not need their approval. I had a mission that was far bigger than their petty social hierarchy. I set the phone down face down on the glass table and turned my attention back to the bank of monitors. The noise of their gossip faded into the background, replaced by the hum of my servers crunching data. Let them talk, let them judge. While they were busy typing angry text messages, I was busy tracing the wire transfers that would send their pillar of the community to federal prison. They were playing a social game, but I was hunting a predator. And a lion does not concern herself with the opinions of sheep. The cheap motel room near the airport smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner, a scent that clung to the peeling wallpaper and the synthetic bedspread. I had rented it for $40 a night, cash up front, just to maintain the charade of my destitution. I was sitting in the lone wobbly chair reviewing bank records on a burner tablet when the violence started. A fist hammered against the hollow core door, shaking the frame and rattling the safety chain. It was not a knock. It was an assault. "Open up, Nia. I know you are in there." I recognized the voice immediately. It was Darius. I stood up slowly and smoothed the front of my oversized t-shirt. I did not reach for a weapon. I reached for the record button on the tiny high-definition camera I had positioned on top of the television, disguised as a portable charger. I checked the angle, ensuring it covered the entire entryway. Then I walked to the door and undid the latch. Darius burst into the room like a storm front, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and marijuana. He was wearing a designer tracksuit that cost more than the entire contents of the room, and his eyes were wild with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. He kicked the door shut behind him and advanced on me, his finger jabbing the air inches from my face. "You think you are funny posting comments on Amber's page. You think you can embarrass my wife and threaten my father. You are making a big mistake, Nia, a very big mistake." I took a step back, not out of fear, but to ensure his face was perfectly illuminated by the flickering fluorescent light. "I am not threatening anyone, Darius," I said, my voice calm and low. "I am just asking for my property back." "Is that why you are here? Did you bring the check?" He laughed, a harsh barking sound that lacked any real humor. "Check. There is no check. And there never will be. You need to understand how things work in the real world, sis. Dad has connections. I have connections. You think we are just businessmen. You have no idea who we know." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "I know people in Zone 6, Nia. Real shooters. People who do not care about lawsuits or deeds. People who solve problems for a few $100s. If you do not drop this. If you keep coming after Dad, I make one phone call and you disappear. Do you understand me? You will just be another missing person statistic." He was posturing, playing the role of the tough guy he had seen in movies, but the threat was specific and it was actionable. He was threatening physical harm to silence a creditor. In the state of Georgia, that was aggravated stalking and terroristic threats. It was also attempted extortion. I looked him dead in the eye. "Are you threatening to kill me, Darius? Are you telling me that if I do not let Marcus steal my money, you are going to hire someone to hurt me?" He sneered, leaning in until I could feel the heat of his breath. "I am telling you to watch your back. Accidents happen, especially in neighborhoods like this. Back off or you will regret it. That is a promise." He shoved me hard enough to make me stumble back against the dresser, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard a piece of plaster fell from the ceiling. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I walked over to the camera and stopped the recording. I played it back, watching the high-definition footage of my stepbrother committing a felony. He thought he was a gangster protecting his turf. He had just handed me the leverage to put him away for 5 years. I saved the file to 3 different cloud servers and named it Exhibit D. The trap was set, and Darius had just walked right into it. I sat in the silence of my high-rise sanctuary, illuminated only by the blue glow of 3 monitors. The city of Atlanta sprawled out below me, a grid of lights and old money, but my focus was entirely on the digital paper trail in front of me. To the average person, a credit report is just a list of numbers and dates. To a forensic accountant, it is an autobiography. It tells you who a person is, what they fear, and what they desire. I cracked Marcus' credit file with a few keystrokes, bypassing the security questions, using the data I had scraped from his home Wi-Fi network. The file opened, and the story of his financial suicide laid itself out in brutal red columns. I expected to see a wire transfer to an offshore account, or a series of cash withdrawals to pay off Silas, the loan shark. That would have been the logical move for a man who valued his kneecaps. I scrolled to the transaction history for the account where the proceeds from my cabin sale had been deposited. The entry was there: $150,000 from Titan Holdings LLC. It had hit the account on Tuesday. By Thursday morning, the balance was nearly zero. But the money had not gone to the gambling syndicate. I traced the first outgoing transfer. $85,000 had been wired directly to Buckhead Motorcars. I cross-referenced the amount with their inventory, and there it was. The silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class sitting in my mother's driveway. He had not leased it. He had bought it almost outright, throwing my grandfather's legacy into a depreciating asset, just so he could drive to church in a car that made him look like a king. He had prioritized leather seats and a hood ornament over his own survival. I tracked the second transfer, $25,000 to a high-end jeweler in Lenox Square. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. That was the ring on Amber's finger. I froze. I had called it a fake earlier based on the refraction, but looking at the invoice now, I realized the truth was even more pathetic. He had bought a real setting, a platinum band, encrusted with small, genuine diamonds, but the center stone was indeed a high-quality simulant, just as I suspected. He had spent $25,000 to make a fake ring look expensive enough to fool his daughter-in-law and her social climbing parents. He was buying their respect with stolen money. The remaining $40,000 was gone in a flurry of payments to credit card companies to lower his utilization ratio, temporarily boosting his credit score just enough to likely qualify for another loan. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the sheer vanity of it. Marcus was walking around with a target on his back, owing $200,000 to violent criminals, and when he finally got his hands on a lifeline, he did not use it to save himself. He used it to buy costumes for his performance of wealth. He was so addicted to the image of being the provider, the patriarch, the successful businessman, that he would rather die looking rich than live admitting he was broke. This was better than I had hoped. If he had paid the loan shark, the money would be gone into the black hole of the underworld, untraceable and unrecoverable. But cars and jewelry are tangible assets. They are physical proof of where the proceeds of a crime went. He had converted my stolen property into seized goods. I saved every transaction record and compiled them into a dossier. Marcus thought he was slick driving around in his new car. He did not realize he was driving a piece of evidence. He had not paid his debts. He had just bought the rope that I was going to use to hang him. I shifted my focus from the bank records to the communication logs I had intercepted from Marcus' phone. The cloning software I installed while connected to the house Wi-Fi was paying dividends. His inbox was a graveyard of ignored warnings, but one number stood out, having called him 12 times in the last 6 hours. No voicemail was left until the last one. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and played the audio file. The voice was calm, which was far more terrifying than if he had been screaming. It was Silas. Marcus. The voice rasped, sounding like gravel grinding on concrete. You promised me a payment by noon today. I hear you sold a property. I hear there is cash flowing, but my accounts are still empty. Do not make me come to that nice house in the suburbs. Do not make me introduce myself to your wife. I sat back, the blood humming in my ears. Silas knew about the sale. He knew Marcus had liquidity, but he did not know where the money went. He likely assumed Marcus was hoarding it, or had hit a snag with the bank transfer. He did not know that his money was currently parked in my mother's driveway in the form of a German sedan and sitting on Amber's finger as a sparkly lie. Marcus was playing a dangerous game of chicken with a man who likely solved problems with a tire iron. He was ghosting a loan shark while driving a brand new Mercedes around Atlanta. It was not just stupid, it was suicidal. This was the leverage I needed. I could have gone to the police right then. I could have handed over the evidence of the illegal gambling debts and let the law take its course. But the police take time and investigations drag on. I needed Marcus to feel the walls closing in now. I needed him desperate, paranoid, and making mistakes. I needed to speed up the timeline. I opened a secure, untraceable messaging app on my burner phone. I did not message Marcus. I messaged the number that had left the voicemail. I typed a simple text attaching the photos I had taken earlier that day of the Mercedes in the driveway and a zoomed-in shot of Amber flashing the ring on Instagram. The caption was short and brutal. He cashed out Tuesday. He spent your money on toys on Wednesday. He is laughing at you. I hit send. It was a cold move, putting my stepfather in immediate physical danger, but I remembered the smirk on his face when he told me he sold my cabin. I remembered him stealing my tuition money. I remembered him choosing his vanity over my future time and time again. He had made his bed with snakes, and I was just turning up the heat in the room. Within 30 seconds, the message was marked as read. 5 minutes later, the GPS tracker on Marcus' phone showed him leaving the house at high speed, likely receiving a very different kind of phone call. He was running now, but he had nowhere to go. I chose a coffee shop on the outskirts of Decatur where the linoleum was peeling, and the air smelled of burnt grease and desperation. It was the kind of place Marcus would never step foot in willingly, which was exactly why I picked it. I arrived 30 minutes early to set the stage. I was wearing an oversized gray hoodie that I had owned since college with frayed cuffs and a small stain on the pocket. I pulled my hair back into a messy low bun and deliberately didn't wear concealer to hide the dark circles under my eyes. To the casual observer, I looked like a woman on the edge of a breakdown. To Marcus, I would look like a victory. He walked in 20 minutes late, a deliberate power move, designed to remind me that my time was less valuable than his. He looked ridiculous in this setting. He was wearing a navy blue bespoke suit with a silk pocket square, and his gold watch caught the harsh fluorescent light every time he moved. He stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room with a look of distaste before spotting me in the back booth. He walked over, avoiding the sticky spots on the floor, and slid into the seat opposite me without a greeting. He did not order coffee. He just placed his expensive leather phone case on the chipped laminate table and looked at me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "You look tired, Nia," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I suppose it has been a rough couple of days for you. I saw the comments on Amber's post. It seems the community is really rallying behind the family. It must be hard reading all those things people are saying about you." I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller. I let my hands tremble slightly as I wrapped them around my paper cup. "It is terrible, Marcus," I whispered, keeping my eyes downcast. "I cannot even go to the grocery store without people staring at me. Everyone thinks I am a monster. Amber won't take the post down. I just want it to stop. Please, I cannot live like this." Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked like a cat that had just cornered a mouse. "Well, you brought this on yourself, darling. You came in here making threats, talking about lawyers and deeds. You disrespected the hierarchy of this family. What did you expect? Did you think we would just roll over? We are Wilsons. We protect our own, and right now you are acting like an outsider." I looked up at him, my eyes wide and pleading. "I am sorry, Marcus. I was just... I was shocked about the cabin. I did not mean to cause a war. I just want my life back. I want the harassment to stop. I am afraid I will lose my job if my boss sees those posts." He nodded slowly, enjoying my submission. He was feeding on my fear, validating his own ego. He thought he had broken me. He thought the social pressure and the threats had worked. He had no idea that the trembling hands were a performance, and the fear was a carefully constructed mask. He was so busy gloating that he did not notice I wasn't drinking the coffee. I was fully alert, fully focused, and ready to guide him into the final trap. I reached into my battered canvas tote bag, my hands trembling with a performance of anxiety that deserved an Academy Award. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not printed on heavy bond legal stock, nor did it bear the letterhead of a prestigious law firm. It was standard printer paper, slightly creased at the corner, looking exactly like something a desperate, frightened woman would type up on a library computer. I slid it across the sticky laminate table toward Marcus, keeping my eyes fixed on my half-empty cup of cold tea. "What is this?" Nia, Marcus asked, looking at the paper with a mixture of suspicion and boredom. He did not touch it yet, as if he were afraid my poverty might rub off on his silk suit. "It is a peace offering," I whispered, my voice cracking just enough to sell the defeat. "It is a liability waiver. I did some research online. I just want this to be over, Marcus. I cannot afford a lawyer, and I certainly cannot afford to fight you and Amber in the court of public opinion. I am tired of the text messages. I am tired of being afraid." I took a deep, shaky breath and pointed to the paragraph in the center of the page. "This just says that I acknowledge the sale of the cabin. It says that I formally waive my right to sue you for the proceeds or the property. It states that you, Marcus Wilson, acted as the primary agent and that you retain full ownership of the $150,000 generated from the sale. In exchange, you agree to stop Darius and Amber from harassing me. We go our separate ways. You keep the money, I get my piece. Marcus finally picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the text rapidly. A smarter man would have paused. A smarter man would have asked why I was so specific about the dollar amount and his sole possession of the funds. A smarter man would have realized that by signing this he was creating a sworn affidavit, confessing to the receipt of funds that he had no intention of declaring to the IRS. But Marcus was not a smart man. He was a greedy man, and greed has a way of blinding people to the trap doors beneath their feet. He saw the words wave right to sue and stopped reading. He saw the confirmation that he got to keep the money and his ego swelled. He looked up at me, a smug smile spreading across his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had bullied me into submission. He saw a daughter surrendering. I saw a criminal signing his own confession. "This is very sensible of you, Nia," he said, pulling a gold Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket. "I am glad you finally saw reason. You know I never wanted to fight with you. I just wanted what was best for the family. And frankly, this is best for you too. You are not cut out for the stress of high finance or legal battles." He uncapped the pen with a flourish. I held my breath, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. This document was the linchpin of my entire strategy. Once he signed this, he was confirming two things. First, that he had sold the property, which locked him into the fraud charge since the deed was forged. Second, and more importantly, he was confirming he kept 100% of the proceeds. When the IRS saw this document and compared it to his tax return, where he would undoubtedly fail to report the income, he would be facing federal prison time for tax evasion. He pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. I watched the ink flow, marking the page with his signature. It was a flamboyant signature, big and looping, taking up far more space than necessary. It was the signature of a man who loved to be seen. He pushed the paper back toward me with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "There," he said, leaning back as if he had just done me a massive favor. "It is done. Now clean yourself up, Nia. You are representing the Wilson name, and frankly, you look like a mess." I took the paper, my hands suddenly steady. I folded it carefully and placed it back in my bag. I had what I needed. The trap was primed. Marcus leaned over the sticky laminate table, his gold cufflinks clinking against the cheap surface as he adjusted his position. He held his expensive Mont Blanc pen like a scepter, preparing to bestow a favor upon a peasant. A prudent man would have read the fine print. A cautious man would have wondered why his forensic accountant's stepdaughter had drafted a document that specifically listed the exact dollar amount of the sale and explicitly stated that he retained sole possession of the funds. But Marcus was neither prudent nor cautious. He was a narcissist who was currently high on the fumes of his own perceived victory. He saw the document not as a legal contract, but as a surrender flag. He saw a daughter bowing down to his authority, and that was all the validation he needed to turn off his brain. He scrawled his signature across the bottom line with a flamboyant flourish, the ink glistening wet and black under the harsh fluorescent lights. He did not just sign his name. He carved it into the paper, claiming ownership of the fraud just as surely as he had claimed ownership of my cabin. He sat back, capping the pen with a sharp, audible click that sounded to my ears exactly like the lock of a prison cell snapping shut. He pushed the paper back toward me with the back of his hand, his face relaxed into a mask of smug satisfaction. "There," he said, his voice dripping with paternal condescension. "Was that so hard, Nia? It is good to see you finally coming to your senses. You know I was worried about you. I thought maybe that time in Africa had made you forget your place in this family. But I see you are still the sensible girl we raised. You are making the right choice. No one wins when they go against the head of the house." He reached out and patted my hand, a gesture meant to be comforting, but which felt slimy and possessive. I forced myself not to recoil. I forced myself to keep my eyes cast down, playing the role of the defeated child until the very last second. "Thank you, Marcus," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I just want peace." Peace is what you shall have, he replied, standing up and buttoning his bespoke jacket. He looked down at me one last time, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of a man who believes he has gotten away with murder. You are a good daughter, Naya. Keep your head down, work hard at your little job, and maybe one day you will understand the burden of leadership. Now, if you will excuse me, I have business to attend to. Real business. He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, strutting past the stained tables and the tired patrons as if he were walking a red carpet. He did not look back. He did not see the moment my demeanor changed from beaten to predatory. As soon as the door chimed behind him, I picked up the paper. My hands, which had been trembling moments ago, were now perfectly steady. I looked at his signature. It was not just a name. It was a sworn affidavit. By signing this, he had legally acknowledged that he alone had sold the property, and crucially that he alone retained the full $150,000. He had just admitted to the IRS that he had income he had no intention of declaring. He had admitted to the state that he had executed a deed transfer for a property he did not own. He thought he had signed a peace treaty. In reality, he had just signed his own arrest warrant. I watched the taillights of Marcus' expensive sedan disappear around the corner, the red glow fading into the gray smog of the city. He was probably already calling Amber to brag about how he had handled me, how he had silenced the inconvenient stepdaughter with a signature and a pat on the head. I stood there on the cracked sidewalk in front of the coffee shop, clutching my cheap canvas bag to my chest, letting the cool wind dry the fake tears on my cheeks. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen, and now it was time for the director to step onto the stage. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket and typed a single code. 2 minutes later, the hum of a 12-cylinder engine cut through the noise of the passing traffic. It was a sound that did not belong in this neighborhood, a deep, refined purr that spoke of unlimited power and precision engineering. A phantom black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb, its polished surface reflecting the gritty street like a dark mirror. Passers-by stopped and stared, mouths open. They looked from the car to me, the girl in the oversized hoodie and scuffed shoes trying to make the connection. They could not compute the equation. The rear door opened not by a driver, but by a man who stepped out with the grace of a jungle cat. It was Julian, my personal attorney and the fiercest litigator in Atlanta. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than the coffee shop behind me was worth. He did not look at the gawking strangers. His eyes were locked on me. He held the door open, his expression professional and grave. He did not treat me like the poor relation. He treated me like the CEO of a multinational corporation, because that is exactly who I was in spirit, if not in title. I slid into the back seat, the smell of hand-stitched leather and aged oak enveloping me instantly. It was the scent of success, the scent of my real life. Julian slid in beside me, and the heavy door latched shut, sealing out the noise, the dirt, and the lies of the last few days. I exhaled a long, slow breath and let my shoulders drop. I reached into my bag and pulled out the piece of printer paper that Marcus had just signed. I smoothed it out on the leather armrest. Did he bite? Julian asked, his voice quiet and expecting only one answer. I handed him the document. He swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. Julian. He admitted to the sale. He admitted to keeping the funds. And he did it all while thinking he was doing me a favor. Julian scanned the signature, a small wolfish smile appearing on his face. This is not just a waiver, Nia. This is a confession. With this, we have him on fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny. It is the trifecta. I looked out the tinted window at the city that Marcus wanted so desperately to conquer. Execute the protocol. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Send the full dossier to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Attach the bank records, the deed, and this affidavit. Then send a copy to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I want his assets frozen by morning. I want his world to stop spinning before he even realizes the earth has moved. Julian nodded, pulling out his secure tablet to begin the transmission. The fish was in the net, and I was about to pull him out of the water. I returned to the penthouse and kicked off my shoes, sinking into the leather chair in front of my command center. Julian had already filed the paperwork with the IRS and the FBI, but the wheels of justice turned slowly, and I was not in the mood to wait. I wanted Marcus to feel the pain immediately. I wanted to hit him where it hurt the most. Not in his wallet because that was already empty, but in his ego. I wanted him to know that he had not just committed a crime, but that he had committed a stupid crime. He had sold a winning lottery ticket for the price of a bus ride, and I was about to make sure he knew exactly how much he had lost. I opened a secure browser window and logged into a private server I used for planting information. My target was the Atlanta Real Estate Insider, a digital gossip rag read by every broker, developer, and social climber in the state. Marcus checked it religiously every morning, desperate to see his name in print, or to find the next big deal that would finally make him rich. I was about to give him the headline of the century. I drafted a leaked memo designed to look like an internal document from the Georgia Zoning Board. The subject line was Blue Ridge Eco Resort Development Project Phase 1. I attached a fabricated map that showed a massive $500 million luxury resort being planned for the mountains. And right in the center of the development map, highlighted in gold, was my grandfather's cabin property. I added a note from a fictional senior developer stating that the acquisition of the Wilson lot was critical to the project and that the current market valuation for that specific parcel was $4.2 million. I smiled as I read it over. It was a beautiful lie wrapped in a plausible truth. The area was developing, but not like this. However, to a man like Marcus, who believed he was smarter than everyone else, it would look like the opportunity of a lifetime. I sent the document to 3 of the biggest loudmouths in the Atlanta real estate scene, knowing they would not bother to fact-check before spreading the news. I sat back and watched the digital ripples turn into a tsunami. Within 20 minutes, the message boards were lighting up. I saw tweets speculating about the mystery buyer Titan Holdings. I saw forum posts calling it the heist of the decade. People were saying that whoever sold that land for anything less than 7 figures was the biggest idiot in Georgia. I could practically hear the phones ringing across Buckhead. The rumor was moving faster than the speed of sound, traveling from country club locker rooms to boardrooms and inevitably to the ears of the man who had just signed a piece of paper admitting he sold it for $150,000. I took a sip of my wine and watched the chaos unfold. This was psychological warfare. I was winding him up. I was letting the greed that lived in his heart consume him. When he found out what he had done, he would not care about the fraud or the forgery. He would only care about the money he had left on the table. He would try to claw it back. He would get desperate. And desperate men make fatal mistakes. The trap was not just legal anymore. It was emotional. And Marcus was about to snap. Marcus stood on the 12th tee of the exclusive Buckhead Country Club, feeling like a king. The morning sun glinted off his brand-new titanium driver, a club that cost more than my first car. He took a practice swing, the whoosh of the club head slicing through the air with a satisfying sound. For the first time in months, he felt light. The crushing weight of the loan sharks was gone, or at least pushed back by the cash in his account. He had silenced his annoying stepdaughter with a simple signature, and he was driving a Mercedes that commanded respect. He adjusted his silk polo shirt and looked at his playing partners. There was Harrison, a prominent commercial developer, and Judge Reynolds, a man who knew everyone in Atlanta politics. These were the men Marcus desperately wanted to be. Today he felt like their equal. Harrison leaned on his club, lighting a cigar, and exhaling a cloud of expensive smoke. He looked at Marcus with a grin that was half admiration and half envy. "You are a sly fox, Marcus. I have to hand it to you. I always thought you were just a small-time investor, but you have been playing the long game this whole time. I did not know you had that kind of patience." Marcus chuckled nervously, not entirely sure what Harrison was referring to, but happy to accept the compliment. He placed his ball on the tee. "You know me, Harrison. I always keep my cards close to the vest. Strategy is everything in this business. Judge Reynolds nodded, taking a sip of his iced tea. Strategy indeed. When I heard the news this morning, I nearly choked on my coffee. The Blue Ridge Eco Resort Project. It is finally official. The zoning board quietly approved it late last night. $500 million in development funds, Marcus. That is going to transform the entire mountain range. And right in the center of it is that old property of yours. Marcus froze in the middle of his backswing. He lowered the club slowly, his heart skipping a beat. He tried to keep his face neutral, but a flicker of confusion crossed his eyes. The Blue Ridge Project, he asked, trying to sound casual. I heard rumors, but I thought it was dead in the water. Harrison laughed, slapping his thigh. Dead. It is the biggest greenlighting in Georgia history. Titan Holdings is the lead developer. They are buying up every acre surrounding the lake, but they need the prime lots for the main hotel and casino. And from what my sources tell me, your stepdaughter's lot is the keystone. Without it, they cannot build the access road. Marcus felt a cold bead of sweat trickle down his back, despite the mild weather. He gripped his club tighter. Keystone, he repeated, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. Yes, the keystone. Harrison continued, oblivious to Marcus' internal panic. I heard land values in that specific sector jumped 400% overnight. If you still hold that deed, Marcus, you are sitting on a gold mine. I am talking mid-seven figures easily. Maybe 4 or 5 million if you squeeze them. No wonder you were walking around here looking so confident. You are about to become the richest man in the club. The judge raised his glass in a toast. To Marcus Wilson, the man who knew when to hold and when to cash out. You must be planning one hell of a celebration. Marcus forced a smile onto his face. It felt tight and brittle like a mask made of dried clay. He nodded mechanically, accepting their praise. Inside his mind was racing. $5 million. The words echoed in his skull. He had just sold it for $150,000. He had sold a diamond mine for the price of a shovel. He looked down at the pristine white ball on the tee, but all he could see was the number 4.2 million burning in the grass. He swung his club, but his form was gone. The ball sliced wild into the woods, disappearing into the deep dark trees just like his fortune. The atmosphere on the fairway shifted instantly. One minute Marcus was the envy of his peers, a man who had successfully liquidated a distressed asset during a tough economy. The next minute, he was the punchline to a joke he did not even understand yet. The man standing next to him was a commercial real estate broker named Harrison, who had his nose buried in his smartphone scrolling through the breaking industry news. Harrison looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and professional jealousy. He looked at Marcus with a newfound reverence that was entirely misplaced. You are a genius, Marcus Harrison said, shaking his head in disbelief. I do not know how you knew. I really do not. I thought that land was dead weight, but I am looking at the new zoning appraisals right now. The county just released the updated valuations based on the resort approval. He turned the screen of his phone toward Marcus so he could see the numbers in black and white. See this lot here? Harrison pointed to the center of the digital map. The Wilson lot. The one you said you were restructuring, because it controls the water access for the entire valley. The appraisal just came in at $4.2 million. And that is the conservative estimate. Once the bidding war starts between the hotel chains, it could go to 5 or 6. The world stopped spinning for my stepfather. The birds stopped singing. The wind stopped rustling the trees. The only sound in his universe was the blood rushing in his ears like a freight train. $4.2 million. The number echoed in his skull, bouncing around the empty space where his conscience used to be. 4.2 million. He had sold it for $150,000. He had forged a signature, committed a felony, and destroyed his relationship with his stepdaughter for a sum that was less than 4% of the property's real value. He had traded a fortune for a used car and a fake ring. The titanium driver slipped from his gloved hand. It hit the cart path with a loud metallic clatter that startled everyone in the group. Marcus did not reach down to pick it up. He could not feel his fingers. His knees turned to water, and he had to grab the side of the golf cart to keep from collapsing onto the manicured grass. "Are you all right, Marcus?" Judge Reynolds asked, stepping forward with concern. "You look like you have seen a ghost. You are pale as a sheet." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was doing the math over and over again in his head, praying that he had carried a zero wrong. But the math was brutal and unforgiving. He had essentially taken $4 million of his own potential wealth and set it on fire. The greed that had driven him to steal from me was now consuming him from the inside out. He felt bile rise in his throat. He realized with a sickening clarity that he had been played. He thought about the waiver I had him sign. He thought about how eager he was to claim the sale. He had fought so hard to steal the crumbs that he missed the feast. And now, looking at the map on Harrison's phone, he realized the feast belonged to Titan Holdings. He realized he had been robbed by his own stupidity. The feed from the hidden camera inside the living room provided a front-row seat to the implosion I had engineered. I watched from my penthouse as the heavy oak front door flew open with enough force to bang against the wall. Marcus stormed in his face a mottled mask of purple rage and terror. He did not look like the composed deacon who had preached about greed on Sunday. He looked like a man whose soul had been repossessed. He threw his golf cap across the room, knocking over a vase of fresh lilies that my mother had just arranged. The sound of shattering porcelain brought Vivian running from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes wide with alarm. "Marcus, what is wrong?" she cried, stepping over the broken pottery. "Did something happen at the club?" Marcus turned on her like a rabid dog. "It is your fault," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You stupid woman! Why did you sign those papers so fast? Why didn't you tell me to wait? You rushed me. You always rush me." Vivian recoiled as if he had slapped her. "Me? Marcus, you told me to sign. You said we needed the cash immediately. You said it was a brilliant move. I did not know the zoning board was meeting last night," he roared, pacing the Persian rug like a caged animal. "I just found out. The land, Vivian. The land you let me sell for pennies. It is worth $4.2 million. $4.2 million. The number hung in the air like a mushroom cloud. Before Vivian could process the magnitude of the loss, Darius and Amber appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the shouting. They froze, gripping the banister. "What did you say, Dad?" Darius asked, his voice trembling. $4 million. Marcus looked up at his son, his eyes wild. "Yes, 4 million. That is what the developers are paying. And thanks to your mother's eagerness and your sister's trickery, we gave it away for the price of a used car. We are ruined. We are the laughingstock of Atlanta." The silence broke instantly. Amber let out a shriek that distorted the audio on my monitor. $4 million. She flew down the stairs. Her face twisted into a snarl that ruined her curated beauty. "You told me we were set, Marcus. You told me this family had assets. I married into this family because I thought you were smart. $4 million would have put us on the private jet tier, and you let Nia walk away with it." She turned on Darius, shoving him hard in the chest. "And you stood there playing video games while your sister stole our future. You are pathetic. You are not a businessman. You are a loser, just like your father." Darius pushed her back, his face red. "Shut up, Amber. Do not talk to me like that. This is Dad's fault. He is the one who said sell. He is the one who wanted the Mercedes." I watched as the perfect family began to cannibalize itself. Marcus was screaming at Vivian for listening to him. Amber was screaming at Darius for being broke. Darius was screaming at Marcus for being a fraud. They were not mourning the loss of my grandfather's property or the sentimental value of the cabin. They were mourning the loss of the money they felt entitled to steal. The greed that had united them against me was now the very thing tearing them apart throat by throat. I took a sip of my wine and watched the sharks enter a feeding frenzy with no one left to eat but each other. I watched on the monitor as Amber's expression shifted from blind rage to cold calculation. She was a survivor in the worst sense of the word, a woman who would burn down a village to keep herself warm. She stopped screaming at Darius and suddenly grabbed his shoulders, her fingernails digging into his designer tracksuit. Her eyes were wide and manic, darting back and forth as the gears in her head ground together to find a way out of the disaster. "Wait," she hissed, silencing the room. "Wait just a minute. We are looking at this all wrong. We are acting like it is over, but it is not over." She turned to Marcus, who was slumped in his armchair, staring blankly at the wall. "Marcus, you said Vivian signed the deed, right? You said she signed Nia's name because Nia was out of the country." Marcus looked up slowly, blinking in confusion. "Yes. So what? The deal is done, Amber. The money is gone." Amber let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "No, it is not. Don't you see? If Vivian signed it, then the deed is a forgery. It is a fraudulent document. In the eyes of the law, a transfer based on a forged signature is void ab initio. It means it never happened. It means the land still belongs to Nia." Darius shook his head, looking confused. "But Amber, if we say it is a forgery, then we are admitting that Mom committed a crime. We are admitting that we stole the land." Amber spun around, her face twisted with greed. "Who cares, Darius? We are talking about $4 million. $4 million. For that kind of money, who cares if we have to admit to a little paperwork error? We can say it was a misunderstanding. We can say Vivian thought she had power of attorney and made a mistake. The point is, if we can prove the signature is fake, we can sue to have the sale overturned. We can get the land back from this Titan Holdings, and once we get it back, we sell it to the developers for the full market price." I sat in my penthouse, stunned by the sheer audacity of it. The irony was so thick, I could practically taste it. They had committed a felony to steal from me. Now, realizing they had sold too low, they wanted to use that same felony as their legal defense to steal it back. They were willing to go to court and stand before a judge and loudly proclaim, "We are fraudsters," just so they could get a second chance at being rich. They were going to weaponize their own crime. Marcus sat up straighter, the color returning to his cheeks. He looked at Amber with a dawning realization. "You are right. You are absolutely right. Titan Holdings cannot keep property that was sold to them illegally. We can file an injunction. We can claim invalid conveyance. We just need to get Nia on board. We need her to sign a new power of attorney so we can sell it properly this time." Amber nodded eagerly, pacing the room. "Exactly. We go to Nia. We tell her there was a mistake. We tell her the sale was invalid and we are fixing it for her. We do not tell her about the $4 million, obviously. We just tell her we are getting her land back because we feel guilty. Then once it is back in her name, we get her to sign it over to us for real this time. We give her maybe $20,000 to shut her up, and we keep the rest." I took a sip of my wine, marveling at their stupidity. They were plotting to approach me to admit to the very crime I had already reported them for. They were digging their own graves with shovels made of gold. They thought they had found a loophole. In reality, they were about to hand me the final nail for their coffins. "Go ahead," I whispered to the screen. "Try it. See what happens when you try to con a con artist." My secure phone buzzed on the glass desk, vibrating against the surface like an angry hornet. The caller ID displayed Marcus' name. I took a slow sip of my Pinot Noir and checked the time. It had been exactly 45 minutes since the rumors of the resort development hit the message boards. He was right on schedule. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, ensuring my voice sounded thick with the exhaustion of the defeated. "Hello, Marcus." "Nia, sweetheart." Marcus' voice oozed through the speaker, warm and sickeningly sweet. It was a tone he usually reserved for wealthy donors at church or creditors he was trying to stall. "I have been doing a lot of thinking since we met at the coffee shop. I have been praying on it, actually, and the Lord has put a heavy burden on my heart. I realized that I was wrong to sell that cabin. It is not just property. It is your grandfather's legacy. It is a piece of your history." I almost laughed out loud. The only burden on his heart was the realization that he had thrown away a $4 million winning lottery ticket. He did not care about my grandfather. He did not care about history. He cared that Harrison and the judge were probably laughing at him behind his back. But I stayed in character. I let a tremulous hope enter my voice. Really, Marcus? Do you mean that? Yes, baby girl, he said, eager now, sensing weakness. I want to make it right. I want to buy the property back. I will contact the buyer myself. I will offer them a little profit on top of what they paid just to get the deed back in the family name. Then we can transfer it back to you. We can fix this, Nia. We can be a whole family again. It was a clumsy lie. He had no intention of transferring it back to me. His plan was obviously to buy it back cheap, using the excuse of a mistake, and then flip it immediately to the developers for the full market value. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was desperate enough for his approval to hand him the keys to the kingdom. I sighed a long, tragic sound that I hoped conveyed deep resignation. Oh, Dad, I wish you had called yesterday. I really do. Because I tried. After I left the coffee shop, I felt so sick about losing the place that I had a friend look into the buyer. There was a pause on the line, a tense, breathless silence. "And what did you find?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "It is bad news," I said. "The buyer is a shell company called Titan Holdings LLC. They are a massive corporate entity. My friend said they are buying up everything in the valley for some big secret project. I tried to call their registered agent to see if they would flip it, but they said the land is already slated for development. They are not selling Marcus. Not for any price. It is gone." I heard him choke back a curse word. "No, that cannot be right, Nia. Everything has a price. You just have to know who to talk to. Give me the number. I will handle them. Men listen to men." "I am sorry, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice soft but final. "It is out of our hands. The deal is done. You sold it, and they bought it. It is over." I hung up the phone before he could argue further. I looked at the corporate registration documents for Titan Holdings on my screen. He was right about one thing. Men might listen to men, but money listens to power. And right now I held all the power. He was going to spend the next 24 hours frantically trying to find a crack in the armor of a company that I controlled. He was going to exhaust himself chasing a ghost while I prepared for the final reveal. The sun dipped below the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across my penthouse. But inside my dressing room, the lights were bright and unforgiving. Tonight was the 30th wedding anniversary of Marcus and Vivian. It was supposed to be their coronation, a celebration of 3 decades of lies and image maintenance. But for me, it was an execution. I walked over to the garment rack where my disguise hung. The fraying gray hoodie, the scuffed flats, the shapeless trousers that screamed poverty and defeat. I looked at them for a long moment, feeling a surge of contempt, not for the clothes themselves, but for the way my family had looked at me when I wore them. They saw those rags and saw a victim. They never looked close enough to see the fire in my eyes. I gathered the bundle of cheap fabric in my arms and dropped it into the trash bin. Nia, the struggling clerk, was dead. Tonight, they were going to meet the real me. I unzipped the heavy black garment bag that Julian had brought over earlier. Inside hung a suit that cost more than Marcus' new Mercedes. It was a custom-commissioned piece from a Parisian haute couture house cut from silk crepe in a blindingly pure white. I chose white for a reason. In some cultures, it is the color of mourning, but in mine tonight, it was the color of truth. It was the color of a clean slate. I slipped into the trousers, feeling the cool silk against my skin. The tailoring was razor-sharp, designed to command respect and intimidate rivals in boardrooms across the globe. I buttoned the blazer. It cinched my waist and broadened my shoulders, giving me the silhouette of a warrior. This was not just clothing. It was armor. Then came the accessories. I opened the velvet safe box on my vanity. I bypassed the modest gold studs I usually wore and reached for the heavy artillery. I fastened a diamond choker around my neck. These were not lab-grown stones. These were not moissanite simulants like the ones Amber was currently polishing. These were VVS1 Clarity Natural Diamonds, ethically sourced and cold as ice. Each stone caught the light and threw it back with a brilliance that was almost blinding. I slid a Patek Philippe watch onto my left wrist. It was weighty, substantial, and utterly undeniable. When I checked the time on its face, I was not just checking the hour. I was counting down the minutes to their destruction. I sat down at the vanity and pulled my hair back. No loose strands tonight, no messy bun. I styled it into a sleek architectural knot that highlighted the sharp angles of my face. I applied a bold red lip, a shade called power play. I stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was not the stepdaughter who begged for tuition money. She was the founder of Nia Finance Group. She was the owner of Titan Holdings. She was a billionaire who had been pushed too far. I stood up and smoothed the lapels of my white jacket. The transformation was complete. They were expecting a lamb to lead to the slaughter. Instead, they were getting a lioness coming to claim her territory. I grabbed my clutch, which held nothing but my phone and the digital evidence that would end their lives. "It is showtime," I whispered to the empty room. The St. Regis ballroom was transformed into a garden of white roses and crystal chandeliers. It was a display of excess that cost $40,000, a sum that Marcus had charged to a business line of credit that was already 3 months past due. He was not throwing a party, he was throwing a Hail Mary pass. He stood at the entrance in a new tuxedo, shaking hands with a manic energy that bordered on hysteria. To the guests, he looked like a successful patriarch celebrating 30 years of marriage. But if you looked closely, you could see the sweat beading on his upper lip, and the way his eyes darted around the room scanning for potential investors or unsuspecting victims he could charm out of a quick loan. He was a drowning man trying to sell water to the fish. Beside him stood my mother, Vivian. She was wearing a floor-length gown that she had bought on sale and altered herself to look designer. Around her neck hung a necklace of sparkling stones that were as fake as the smile plastered on her face. She gripped Marcus' arm as if it were a life raft, her knuckles white under her makeup. She greeted the guests with a high-pitched laugh that sounded brittle and on the verge of shattering. She knew they were in trouble, but she had spent 30 years looking the other way, and tonight was her masterpiece of denial. She complimented the wives of bankers and laughed at the jokes of real estate tycoons, playing her part in the con with tragic dedication. The room was filled with the Atlanta elite, or at least the people who pretended to be. These were people who leased their lifestyles and leveraged their reputations. They drank the $200 bottles of champagne and complimented the ice sculptures, having no idea that the man paying for it all was technically insolvent. They gossiped in huddled circles, their eyes sliding over the decor, assessing the cost and judging the taste. I could hear snippets of their conversations drifting through the air like poisonous perfume. I heard them whispering about the land deal, about the rumors of the resort, about how lucky Marcus was to be sitting on a gold mine. Marcus moved through the crowd, clapping men on the back and whispering about bridge loans and temporary liquidity issues. He was trying to secure cash fast, trying to find just enough money to keep the loan sharks away for another week until he could figure out how to steal the land back from me. He was selling promises he could not keep to people who would not hesitate to sue him. He thought he was networking. In reality, he was just adding more names to the list of people I would have to interview when the indictment came down. The band began to play a slow jazz number, and the waiters circulated with trays of caviar. It was a beautiful funeral for a reputation that was already dead. Marcus raised a glass of champagne to the room, acting the part of the King of Atlanta one last time, unaware that the guillotine was already waiting in the wings. The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open with a slow, deliberate weight that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. I did not rush through them. I stepped across the threshold with the measured pace of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. The hum of conversation, which had been a steady drone of gossip and networking, died instantly, starting from the tables nearest the entrance, and rippling outward like a shockwave, until the only sound remaining was the clinking of a single fork against a plate. The jazz band faltered, missing a beat before trailing off into an awkward silence. 300 heads turned in unison, and 300 pairs of eyes widened in confusion. They were looking for the punchline. They were looking for the poor relation, the girl in the scuffed shoes, and the fraying sweater. Instead, they found a vision that did not compute with the rumors they had been fed. I stood under the archway, bathed in the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. The custom white silk suit was luminous against the sea of black tuxedos and safe pastel gowns. It was a beacon of purity and power, tailored so sharply that it looked like it could cut glass. The diamond choker around my neck caught the overhead light and threw it back with a brilliance that forced people to blink. These were not the cloudy stones of a desperate housewife. These were rocks that whispered of old money and private vaults. I held my head high, my expression unreadable behind the mask of the bold red lipstick. I was not there to blend in. I was there to stand out. I was the anomaly in their perfect little ecosystem. Flanking me were two men who looked nothing like the hotel staff. They were broad-shouldered and wore earpieces, their eyes scanning the crowd with professional detachment. They were my personal security detail, a silent testament to a level of wealth that required protection. They created a physical buffer around me, a clear signal that I was untouchable. The guests parted instinctively as I began to walk toward the center of the room. They did not just move aside out of politeness. They moved aside out of a primal recognition of hierarchy. The air around me felt charged electric with the dissonance between who they thought I was and who I actually was. I locked eyes with Marcus across the expanse of the dance floor. He was standing near the stage, a champagne flute tilted dangerously in his hand. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and sickly under the stage lights. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to make a joke or to call out my name, but no sound came out. He looked like a man seeing a ghost. He looked at the suit. He looked at the watch on my wrist. He looked at the security guards. And in that split second, the arrogance that had sustained him for days evaporated. He realized with a terrifying clarity that the girl he had bullied in the coffee shop was a fiction. He realized that the predator he thought he had trapped was actually the one hunting him. He took a half step back, almost tripping over his own feet, his eyes wide with a dawning horror that he could not yet fully name. I did not smile at him. I just kept walking, closing the distance between his lies and my truth. I moved through the ballroom like a shark gliding through a reef. The whispers followed me, but they had changed tone. They were no longer pitiful. They were curious. They were hungry. But there was one voice that cut through the murmur with the sharpness of broken glass. It was Amber. She was standing near the chocolate fountain, clutching her fake diamond hand to her chest, as if she were having palpitations. Her face was a study in cognitive dissonance. She could not reconcile the sister-in-law she had bullied with the woman standing before her. She needed an explanation that fit her small, petty worldview. She needed to drag me back down to the mud where she lived so she could feel tall again. I saw her lean in toward my mother, her eyes darting frantically between me and the guests who were staring in awe. She did not whisper. She hissed loud enough for the entire VIP section to hear, ensuring her venom spread as far as possible. Do not be fooled, Vivian. Look at that suit. It is a rental. I saw that exact same style on a website last week. She probably maxed out a credit card just to rent it for the night to embarrass us. It is all smoke and mirrors. She is trying to look rich to make us feel bad about the cabin. It is pathetic, really. My mother looked uncertain, her eyes glued to the diamond choker at my throat, but Amber was relentless. She grabbed my mother's arm, shaking her slightly. Or worse, Vivian, look at the security. Look at the jewelry. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air like a foul smell. She glanced at my bodyguards, then back at me with a look of feigned disgust. Or she found herself a sponsor. You know what I mean. Some rich old man with more money than sense who likes desperate charity cases. That is the only way someone like her gets a watch like that. She is selling herself Vivian. She is trading her dignity for costumes. It is disgusting, and she has the nerve to wear white like she is innocent. It was the last desperate gasp of a woman whose entire identity was built on being superior to someone she deemed inferior. She could not accept that I had earned this. She could not accept that my wealth was self-made, because if she admitted that, then she had to admit that she was the failure. She wanted the room to see a kept woman because she could not bear for them to see a CEO. I stopped walking. I was 10 feet away from her. A waiter passed by with a silver tray of vintage champagne. I reached out and took a flute, the crystal cool against my fingers. I did not scream at her. I did not defend my honor. I did not tell her that my watch alone was worth more than her entire life earnings. I simply turned my head and locked eyes with her. I held her gaze, letting her see the amusement dancing in my irises. I let her see that her words did not hurt me. They entertained me. I raised the glass slowly in a mock toast, a silent salute to her stupidity. I took a sip, savoring the dry, crisp taste of victory, while she stood there purple with impotent rage, realizing that I was not just out of her league. I was playing a different game entirely. I ascended the short staircase to the stage with the deliberate grace of a predator entering a clearing. The spotlight followed me, cutting through the ambient gloom of the ballroom to illuminate the stark white perfection of my suit. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy and thick with anticipation, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes burning into me, but the only gaze that mattered was Marcus. He was standing just a few feet away at the edge of the platform, frozen in place. His skin had taken on the gray pallor of wet ash, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. He looked like a man standing on a gallows waiting for the floor to drop out from under him. I knew he wanted to stop me. I could see the impulse twitching in his hands, a desperate need to rush the microphone to claim technical difficulties or to drag me off the stage by force. But he was paralyzed by the very thing he worshipped: his reputation. To stop me now in front of Judge Reynolds and the banking elite would be to admit a loss of control. It would cause a scene, and Marcus Wilson would rather die than cause a scene in polite society. He was trapped in the prison of his own vanity, forced to stand there and smile through his terror, while I held the match that would burn his life to the ground. I reached the center of the stage and gripped the microphone stand. The metal was cool under my fingers. I took my time adjusting the height, letting the feedback hum for a split second, just to spike the tension in the room. I looked out at the sea of faces, the diamonds glittering in the darkness, the expensive tuxedos, and the judgment. Then I looked down at Marcus. I smiled at him. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile a shark gives before it rolls its eyes back to bite. "Good evening, everyone." My voice boomed through the high-quality sound system, clear and commanding. "It is truly wonderful to see so many distinguished guests here tonight to celebrate Marcus and Vivian. 30 years of marriage is a significant milestone. It represents a lifetime of building, of striving, and of making difficult choices." I paused, letting the words settle. Marcus shifted his weight, his eyes darting to the security guards flanking the stage, realizing he had no physical route to silence me. "My stepfather has always been a man of vision." I continued, my voice smooth as silk. "He has taught me so much about the nature of business. He taught me that opportunities must be seized, that assets must be liquid, and that sometimes you have to make bold, unilateral decisions for the good of the family. In fact, just this week, Marcus made a business move that changed the financial trajectory of our lives forever. He sold a property that had been in my name, a cabin in the mountains, because he saw a future that I could not see." A murmur rippled through the crowd. They had heard the rumors of the resort deal. They thought I was praising his genius. They thought I was a grateful daughter acknowledging his brilliance. Marcus looked confused, hope warring with fear in his eyes. Was I capitulating? Was I publicly giving him credit? I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice dropping an octave, intimate and deadly. And because of that bold move, because of his unique approach to family finance, I wanted to present him with a gift tonight. It is not a watch or a car. It is something far more valuable. It is the truth. I gestured to the massive projection screen that began to descend from the ceiling behind me. Marcus went rigid. I turned back to the crowd, my eyes flashing. Please turn your attention to the screen for a special presentation dedicated to the business acumen of my stepfather. The massive LED screen behind me flickered to life, bathing the stage in a cool, clinical blue light. It displayed a single document blown up to cinema size so that even the guests in the back of the ballroom could read the fine print. It was a certified commercial land appraisal dated just yesterday morning, stamped with the official seal of the Georgia Zoning Board. But nobody was looking at the seal. Every eye in the room was glued to the figure highlighted in bold at the bottom of the page. $4,200,000. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed immediately by a wave of murmurs that swelled into thunderous applause. The guests were on their feet, raising their champagne flutes high in the air. To them, the narrative was simple. Marcus Wilson, the savvy businessman, had just closed the deal of a lifetime. They assumed that the sale I mentioned earlier was for this amount. They thought they were in the presence of a newly minted multi-millionaire. Calls of bravo and well done. Marcus rang out from the tables of bankers and investors who were suddenly mentally recalculating Marcus' creditworthiness. They looked at him with newfound respect, seeing not a desperate debtor but a financial genius who had quietly secured a fortune. I looked down at Marcus from my vantage point on the stage. He was not clapping. He was clutching his chest with one hand, his fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his tuxedo jacket, as if he were trying to manually keep his heart beating. His face had gone from gray to a sickly translucent white. He was the only person in the room besides me who knew the truth. He knew he had sold that property for $150,000. He was staring at the number on the screen, the 4.2 million, and doing the brutal math of his own stupidity. He had sold a diamond mine for the price of a gravel pit. The applause washing over him must have sounded like mocking laughter. He swayed on his feet, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to breathe under the crushing weight of what he had thrown away. But then I looked at Darius. My stepbrother was standing next to Amber, his eyes wide and shining with a manic, feverish light. He did not understand the tragedy. He was too blinded by the zeros. He grabbed Amber's arm, shaking her excitedly, pointing at the screen. 4 million, he mouthed to her, his face splitting into a greedy grin. We are rich. He was already spending the money in his head, buying cars, buying respect, erasing his failures. He was so consumed by the prospect of wealth that he forgot the reality of the contract his father had signed. He looked up at me on stage, not with hatred, but with a sudden hungry affection, thinking that I was presenting them with a bank deposit rather than an autopsy of their greed. The room was a cacophony of celebration for a funeral, and I stood in the center of it, the conductor of their humiliation, letting the applause build to a crescendo before I delivered the next blow. The shock on Marcus' face dissolved into something uglier, something raw and terrifyingly desperate. It was pure, unadulterated greed. For a moment, I thought he might faint under the crushing weight of the $4 million figure glowing on the screen behind me. But then a manic energy seemed to seize him. He realized that if the land was worth that much, he could not afford to be the man who sold it for pennies. He had to be the man who was fighting to get it back. He had to rewrite history in real time before 300 of Atlanta's wealthiest citizens wrote him off as a fool. He moved with a speed I did not think he possessed, scrambling up the stairs to the stage and nearly tripping over the hem of his tuxedo trousers. He did not ask for permission. He lunged at me, his eyes wild and bloodshot, grabbing the microphone from my hand with a force that sent a screech of feedback tearing through the speakers. The audience winced, covering their ears, but Marcus did not notice. He was panting heavily, sweat streaming down his face, ruining his expensive stage makeup. He looked out at the crowd, his chest heaving, trying to summon the charisma of the deacon, but looking more like a televangelist caught in a scandal. "Yes," he shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Yes, exactly what my daughter is trying to say is that this asset is the crown jewel of the Wilson family portfolio." He gestured frantically at the screen as if trying to physically grab the numbers. "But we have been the victims of a terrible fraud. This Titan Holdings, this predatory company, they took advantage of a temporary administrative error. They stole this land from us. But let me make one thing clear to everyone in this room right now." He paused, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes darting around the room looking for validation. "We are not going to take this lying down. I am announcing tonight that I will be launching a full legal offensive against Titan Holdings. We will sue them for every penny. We will invalidate that sale. That $4.2 million belongs to this family. It belongs to me. And I will not rest until I have reclaimed what is rightfully ours. I will drag them into court, and I will expose them for the thieves they are." He was screaming now, his voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. It was a spectacle of delusion. He was publicly declaring war on the buyer he had happily taken cash from just days ago. He was threatening to sue a shell company for buying a property he had fraudulently sold. He thought he sounded strong. He thought he sounded like a protector. But to the silent crowd, he sounded like a madman. He turned to me, gripping my shoulder with a sweaty hand, his eyes pleading with me to play along to save his skin. "We will get it back, Nia," he whispered loudly into the hot mic. "We will get the money back. We are a team, right?" I did not pull away. I stood perfectly still, letting him implicate himself. I let him stake his entire reputation on this lie. I let him promise a lawsuit against an enemy he could not see. He was so busy trying to claim the $4 million that he forgot he had signed a waiver giving up all rights to the property just hours ago. He was digging his grave with a golden shovel, and I was just standing there watching the dirt fly. Before Marcus could spin another lie, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open again. This time it was not a grand entrance but a strategic strike. Julian, my attorney, walked in carrying a leather briefcase. He did not look at the guests. He walked straight to the stage, his footsteps echoing in the hushed room. He climbed the stairs and stood next to me, a silent sentinel of the law. Marcus looked at him confused. "Who is this?" he demanded, trying to regain control. "Is this one of your friends, Nia?" Julian ignored him. He stepped up to the microphone and adjusted it slightly. His voice was calm, professional, and devoid of any theatricality, which made his words hit even harder. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Julian Vance, and I am the lead counsel for Titan Holdings LLC. A gasp went through the crowd. Marcus' eyes lit up. He thought Julian was there to serve him with papers, or perhaps to negotiate the return of the land he so desperately claimed was stolen. "See," Marcus shouted, pointing at Julian. "See, I told you. They are here because they know they are in the wrong. We will settle this right now." Julian turned to Marcus with a look of mild pity. "Mr. Wilson, I am afraid you are mistaken. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to clarify ownership. You see, Titan Holdings is a privately held entity, and its sole shareholder, its only beneficiary, and its absolute owner is standing right next to me." He raised his hand and pointed directly at me. The room went dead silent. Marcus froze, his mouth hanging open. "Titan Holdings belongs to Ms. Nia Wilson." Julian continued, his voice ringing out. "She purchased the property from herself effectively. She used a shell company to buy back her own stolen asset. The $150,000 you received came directly from her personal accounts. You did not sell the land to a developer, Mr. Wilson. You sold it back to your stepdaughter for pennies on the dollar. And in doing so, you signed a waiver acknowledging that you have no further claim to the property or its value." The realization hit the crowd like a physical blow. The whispers started instantly, a rising tide of shock and awe. Marcus looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. You, he whispered. It was you the whole time. I smiled cold and sharp. Yes, Marcus. It was me. I bought my own land to prove a point. And the point is you are not a businessman. You are a liability. I took the microphone from the stand and held it firmly. The weight of it felt good in my hand, almost like a gavel. The silence in the ballroom was profound. It was the kind of silence where you could hear a pin drop, or in this case, a reputation shatter. I looked down at Marcus. He was no longer the arrogant man who had lectured me in the coffee shop about business. He was trembling, his face a mask of absolute confusion and horror. He looked from me to Julian and back to the screen, unable to process the reality that was staring him in the face. I decided to walk him through it slowly, step by step, so there would be no ambiguity left in the room. You see, Marcus? I began, my voice calm and conversational, as if I were explaining a simple spreadsheet error. Titan Holdings was never a developer. It was a mirror. I established that LLC 3 years ago as a holding vehicle for my personal investments. When I saw the deed transfer in the public records, I did not panic. I did not call the police immediately. I simply acted as any prudent investor would. I authorized my company to purchase the asset you were so desperate to sell. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looming over him. And let us talk about the price. $150,000. That was the number you set, Marcus. That was the value you placed on my grandfather's legacy. You were so eager to get your hands on quick cash to pay your debts that you did not bother to get a real appraisal. You did not bother to check the market. You saw a quick payday and you took it. You thought you were robbing me. You thought you were extracting value from a naive stepdaughter who did not know any better. But in reality, you were negotiating against yourself. I paused, letting the irony soak into the minds of the audience. The bankers in the room were exchanging looks, realizing the magnitude of his incompetence. You might be wondering why I did it. Why did I pay you $150,000 for something that was already legally mine? Why did I let you keep the money? It is simple, really. I needed to legalize the transfer. You see, since the original deed was forged by my mother, the title was cloudy. It could have been contested in court for years. But by buying it back from you through a third party and having you sign that waiver in the coffee shop, acknowledging the sale and the payment, I solidified the chain of title. I gestured to Julian, who held up the waiver Marcus had signed just hours ago. That piece of paper you signed today, Marcus, was not a peace treaty. It was a bill of sale. You formally sold all your rights to a $4 million property for pennies. You validated the transaction. You cleaned up the mess for me. And the best part is you did it with a smile on your face, thinking you had won. So I want to say thank you. Thank you, Marcus, for the deal of the century. You just made me the sole undisputed owner of the most valuable piece of real estate in Georgia, and it only cost me the price of that car sitting in your driveway. I stood on the stage looking down at Marcus as the weight of my words settled over him like a shroud. The ballroom, which had been silent only moments before, was now buzzing with a low rumble of laughter. It started in the back near the tables where his rivals sat and spread quickly through the room. They weren't laughing with him. They were laughing at him. They were laughing at the man who thought he was a titan of industry but had just admitted to selling a multi-million-dollar asset to his own stepdaughter for the price of a used luxury car. It was the kind of public humiliation that destroys a reputation forever. In the world of high finance, being a criminal is sometimes forgiven, but being a fool is a life sentence. Marcus stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked from the projection screen, with the appraisal figure, to me standing in my white suit, and finally down at his own trembling hands. The realization hit him in waves. He hadn't just lost the land. He hadn't just lost the $4 million. He had lost the narrative. For years, he had painted me as the charity case, the ungrateful burden, the failure who needed his guidance. Now, in front of everyone he spent his life trying to impress, he was revealed as the incompetent one. He was the mark in a con he thought he was running. He tried to speak to salvage some shred of dignity, but his throat seemed to close up. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The laughter in the room grew louder, more pointed. I saw Judge Reynolds shaking his head with a smirk. I saw the bankers turning their backs on him, whispering to each other about pulling his lines of credit. The facade he had carefully constructed over 30 years was crumbling in real time, and he was standing in the rubble. His legs gave out. It wasn't theatrical. It was a simple biological failure of a man whose reality had just collapsed. He sank to his knees on the plush carpet of the stage, his tuxedo pants straining against the movement. He didn't look up. Look. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders heaving as he gasped for air. It was a pathetic sight, a man crushed, not by external forces, but by the weight of his own greed and stupidity. I didn't feel pity. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. I had watched him steal from me for decades. I had watched him take my tuition money, my confidence, and finally my grandfather's legacy. Tonight I had taken it all back with interest. I looked out at the audience who were now watching the spectacle with a mixture of amusement and disgust. They saw a broken man. I saw a balance sheet that had finally been corrected. Darius rushed to his father's side, not out of concern, but out of panic, grabbing Marcus by the arm and hissing at him to get up. But Marcus didn't move. He was catatonic, trapped in the nightmare of his own making. I signaled to Julian, who nodded and began to close his briefcase. The legal part was done. The financial part was done. Now it was time for the final act. I turned back to the microphone, my voice cutting through the laughter one last time. "I'm afraid my stepfather is overcome with emotion," I said smoothly. "It's a lot to process, realizing you've been the architect of your own destruction." I waited for the laughter to subside just enough for my voice to carry to the back of the room. Marcus was still on his knees, a broken man crumbling under the weight of his own incompetence. But I was not done with him yet. I had destroyed his reputation as a businessman, but I still needed to destroy his character as a father and a husband. I signaled to the technician in the booth. The screen behind me flickered, and the image of the $4 million appraisal vanished. In its place, a series of bank statements and wire transfer logs appeared, blown up to the size of a billboard. These were not public records. These were the dirty secrets of a desperate man exposed in high definition. "And now, for the second part of my gift," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs like a scalpel. "Because I think it is important for everyone here to know exactly where the money went. Marcus told you he sold the property for the good of the family. He told you he was investing in the future. He told you he was building a legacy. But let us look at the actual portfolio." I walked over to the screen and pointed to the first line item, which was highlighted in neon red. Here we see the deposit of $150,000 from Titan Holdings. And here, just 24 hours later, we see an outgoing wire of $85,000 to Buckhead Motor Cars. That silver Mercedes sitting out front, the one with the temporary tags that Marcus drove here tonight. It was not bought with investment profits. It was bought with my grandfather blood equity. He sold a piece of history to buy a hood ornament. A collective groan of disgust rippled through the crowd. I saw heads turning toward the windows, imagining the car that was now a symbol of theft. And this, I continued, pointing to the next entry. $25,000 to a jeweler in Lenox Square. That ring on Amber finger. The one she has been showing off all night. It was not a generous gift from a loving father-in-law. It was hush money bought with stolen funds. And the tragic part is the invoice shows it is a moissanite stone in a platinum setting. He lied to you too, Amber. He stole from me to buy you a fake. Amber let out a strangled cry, staring at her hand, as if it were burning her skin. She clawed at the ring, trying to rip it off her finger, in a panic, her face twisting with humiliation. "But the most interesting numbers are the ones that are not here," I said, dropping my voice to a whisper that echoed in the silent hall. "You see, Marcus did not sell the land just to buy toys. He sold it because he owes $200,000 to an illegal gambling syndicate operating out of an industrial park in Zone 6. He stole from me to save his life. But his vanity was stronger than his survival instinct. He got the money, and instead of paying his debt, he bought a car to impress you people. He chose to look rich rather than stay safe. The room recoiled. This was not just white-collar crime anymore. This was gritty, dangerous, and pathetic. I looked down at Marcus. He was sobbing now, his hands covering his face. He was not crying because he was sorry. He was crying because the mask was gone, and underneath there was nothing but a frightened, greedy little man who had gambled everything and lost. So there you have it. I finished smoothing the lapel of my white suit. The complete financial history of Marcus Wilson. A man who would steal a fortune, sell it for pennies, and spend the change on a costume. The echoes of my voice had barely faded when the ballroom doors swung open for the third time. This was not a grand entrance for a guest, and it was not a dramatic reveal for a lawyer. It was an invasion. A dozen men and women in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the yellow letters FBI moved into the room with the precision of a military strike team. They were flanked by uniformed officers from the Atlanta Police Department Economic Crimes Unit. The visual shock of seeing federal agents storming a high society gala caused a ripple of panic that was almost physical. The waiters froze with trays of champagne in their hands. The band members lowered their instruments. The wealthy guests who had spent the evening sipping wine and gossiping scrambled backward, knocking over chairs in their desperate attempt to distance themselves from the target. I watched from the stage as the sea of tuxedos and gowns parted to create a wide, clear path for the authorities. I did not flinch, not. I had been expecting them. In fact, I had coordinated the timing with the lead agent just before I stepped onto the stage. The dossier I had compiled was not just a collection of grievances. It was a roadmap of criminal activity so detailed that the prosecutor probably did not even need to do his own discovery. I had handed them the bank account numbers, the dates of the wire transfers, the IP addresses used for the fraudulent deed conveyance, and the audio recordings of Marcus admitting to the sale. I had done their job for them, and tonight they were here to close the case. The agent in charge. A tall man with a face like carved granite marched straight toward the stage. He did not look at the terrified guests. He did not look at the decorations. His eyes were locked on Marcus. Marcus was still on his knees, but at the sight of the badges he tried to scramble to his feet, slipping on the slick surface of the stage in his panic. He looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting from the agents to the exit, realizing there was no way out. The air in the room shifted instantly from a celebration of love to an active crime scene. The smell of expensive perfume was suddenly overpowered by the scent of fear. Marcus Wilson, the agent, boomed, his voice carrying over the whimpering of the crowd. "I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest." Marcus stammered, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he held them up in a gesture of surrender. "Arrest? For what? I have not done anything. This is a misunderstanding. My daughter, she is confused. She is making things up." Agent Miller did not even blink. "You are being charged with 3 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, 1 count of tax evasion and money laundering related to illegal gambling activities. We also have a federal warrant regarding the structuring of financial transactions to avoid reporting requirements." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering. These were not misunderstandings. These were felonies that carried decades of prison time. The guests gasped, clutching their pearls and checking their phones, terrified that their association with Marcus would taint their own reputations. They watched in horror as 2 officers stepped onto the stage and grabbed Marcus by the arms, pulling him roughly from his knees. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists was the loudest sound in the room. It was the final definitive end to the party and the beginning of his nightmare. I looked at the man who had demanded my respect for 20 years as he was pressed against the podium by federal agents. Special Agent Miller did not handle him with the deference Marcus believed he deserved. He spun my stepfather around with practiced efficiency, wrenching his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and mechanical, cutting through the heavy silence of the ballroom like a gunshot. It was the definitive end of Marcus Wilson the businessman, and the beginning of inmate Wilson. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller intoned, his voice flat and bored. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." But Marcus could not remain silent. Panic had overridden his dignity. He thrashed against the agent's grip, his expensive tuxedo jacket tearing at the shoulder seam with a loud rip. He looked out wildly at the crowd, scanning the faces of the people he had tried so hard to impress. He looked for Judge Reynolds, but the judge was suddenly studying the pattern of the carpet. He looked for Harrison, but the broker had turned his back, pretending to make a phone call. The social circle he had sacrificed my future to join had ejected him instantly. He was toxic. He was alone. Then his frantic eyes landed on me. I was standing just a few feet away, untouched by the chaos, my white suit glowing under the stage lights. A desperate delusion took hold of him. He thought he could play the one card he had left. The family card. "Nia," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail that made the guests flinch. "Nia, baby, please. Tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. I am your father. I raised you. You cannot let them take me away. Nia, help me." He lunged toward me, dragging the two agents with him for a step before they jerked him back hard. The movement knocked the microphone stand over, sending a deafening screech of feedback through the speakers. "I am your daddy, Nia," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face, ruining the expensive bronzer he wore to look healthy. "Do not do this to your family. I love you. We can fix this. Just tell them to stop, please." I looked at him, and for a brief second I remembered the 10-year-old girl who had desperately wanted him to be a father. I remembered how she had tried to earn his love with good grades and silence. But that girl was gone. Standing in her place was the woman he had created through years of neglect and theft. I did not step forward. I did not ask the agents to be gentle. I looked him dead in the eye, my expression as cold and hard as the diamonds around my neck. "You are not my father, Marcus," I said, my voice low but clear enough for him to hear over his own sobbing. "You are just the man who sold my house. You are a bad investment that I am finally writing off." The agents hauled him away, dragging him down the stairs he had ascended so triumphantly only minutes before. His shoes scuffed against the floor as he fought his legs giving out under the weight of his fear. He continued to scream my name, begging for a salvation that was never coming. I watched him go, feeling absolutely nothing but the cool air of the ballroom on my skin. The silence that followed his exit was heavy, but for the first time in my life, it felt clean. The spectacle on the stage was only the first act of the dismantling. The federal agents did not stop with Marcus. While he was being dragged away, kicking and screaming, two officers moved with terrifying purpose toward the VIP table, where Amber and Darius stood frozen in a tableau of humiliation. Amber was clutching her left hand to her chest, trying to shield the ring she had been flaunting all evening. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing that the trap had snapped shut, not just on her father-in-law, but on her entire lifestyle. She tried to back away into the crowd, but the guests who had been her friends minutes ago formed an impenetrable wall of turned backs and cold shoulders blocking her escape. An officer stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, "we have a seizure warrant for all assets purchased with the proceeds of the wire fraud. That includes the vehicle parked outside and the jewelry on your person. Hand over the ring." Amber let out a gasp of pure indignation. "You cannot be serious!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. "This is my engagement ring. It is a gift. You cannot just take it. It belongs to me." The officer did not argue. He simply rested his hand on his belt, not in a threatening way, but in a way that signaled he had zero patience for tantrums. "It was purchased with stolen funds, ma'am. That makes it evidence. You can hand it over voluntarily, or you can be charged with possession of stolen property and obstruction of justice. The choice is yours." The threat of handcuffs broke her. She looked at the officer, then at the guests watching her with open disdain. With trembling hands, she clawed the ring off her finger. But she did not hand it to the officer. A sudden wave of vicious realization washed over her. She looked at the ring, the fake diamond that Marcus had bought to shut her up, the symbol of a fortune she would never inherit. Then she looked at Darius, who was standing beside her, looking pale and useless, holding the keys to the Mercedes that the other officer was currently demanding. The rage that exploded out of her was not the anger of a loving wife. It was the fury of a gold digger who had realized the mine was empty. She turned on Darius with a feral snarl. "You lied to me," she screamed. "You told me your family had money. You told me you were investors. You are nothing but a pack of thieves and losers." She drew her arm back and threw the ring with all her might. It hit Darius square in the chest, bouncing off his designer lapel and clattering onto the floor where it spun dizzily before coming to rest near his expensive sneakers. "I wasted 2 years of my life on you," she yelled, her face twisted into a mask of ugly truth. "I could have married a doctor. I could have married someone with a future. Instead, I married a fraud who drives a car bought with his sister's money. I am done, Darius. Do not call me. Do not come back to the condo. I am calling a divorce lawyer in the morning." She turned to the officer and thrust her empty hand out. "There. Take it. It is fake anyway, just like everything else in this miserable family." She stormed past the stunned crowd, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor, leaving Darius standing alone, stripped of his dignity, his car, and his marriage in the span of 60 seconds. The room watched in stunned silence as the officer bent down to pick up the ring, dropping it into an evidence bag with a clinical finality. The symbol of their vanity was now just a tag number in a police locker. The sound of Amber's heels clicking against the marble floor faded away, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than lead. Darius stood alone in the center of the ballroom, a man stripped of every layer of protection he had ever known. In the span of 5 minutes, he had lost his father to federal agents, his car to the police, and his wife to her own vanity. He looked down at his empty hands trembling violently at his sides. He was 29 years old, but in that moment he looked like a lost child searching for an adult to tell him what to do. He looked toward the exit where Marcus had been dragged out, but there was no salvation coming from that direction. He looked at the table where the bankers sat, but they were pointedly ignoring him, scrolling through their phones to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Wilson name. He realized with a terrifying clarity that the party was over. There was no trust fund, there was no crypto investment, there was no inheritance. There was only the looming threat of being an accomplice to fraud and a future that involved actual work, which was a concept he was entirely ill-equipped to handle. He was drowning, and there was only one person left in the room with a life raft. He turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were wide and wet, rimmed with red terror. He stumbled forward, his expensive limited edition sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. He did not walk with the swagger he had shown in the living room when he threatened me. He walked with the desperation of a man on death row. He reached the edge of the stage where I stood, and he did something I never thought I would see Darius Wilson do. He collapsed. He fell to his knees with a heavy thud, ignoring the gasps of the remaining guests. He reached out and wrapped his arms around my legs, burying his face in the pristine white fabric of my trousers. He was sobbing openly now, loud, ugly sounds that echoed off the high ceilings. "Nia, please!" he wailed, his voice muffled against my suit. "You have to help me. I did not know. Dad made me do it. He told me it was okay. I am your brother, Nia. We share blood. You cannot leave me like this. I have nothing." Amber took the cards. The police took the car. I do not have anywhere to go. He tightened his grip, clinging to me as if I were a statue of a saint. "I am sorry about what I said at the apartment." He blubbered, snot and tears smearing onto the silk. "I was just scared. I did not mean it. I will do anything you want. Just give me a chance. Give me a job at your company. I can learn." Please, Nia, do not let me starve. I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head where his hair was perfectly styled with expensive product. I looked at the gold chain around his neck that he had bought with the proceeds of my grandfather's cabin. I felt the wet heat of his tears soaking into the fabric of my custom haute couture suit. I felt absolutely nothing, no pity, no anger. Just a cold, clinical detachment. He was not a brother. He was a parasite that had finally realized its host was armed. I did not bend down to comfort him. I did not pat his head. I simply shifted my weight, causing him to lose his balance slightly. "Get up, Darius," I said, my voice cutting through his sobbing like a blade of ice. He looked up at me, hope flaring in his eyes, thinking I was offering mercy. I pointed a manicured finger at his hands clutching my ankle. "You are getting tears and mucus on a $5,000 suit. And quite frankly, you are making a scene that is beneath me. Stand up. Do not dirty my shoes. They are worth more than your entire future." I walked toward the valet stand where my Porsche Panamera was waiting, its engine idling with a low, powerful rumble that vibrated in my chest. The cool night air of Atlanta felt like freedom against my skin, washing away the stale scent of desperation and cheap perfume from the ballroom. I reached for the door handle, ready to leave the wreckage of my family in the rearview mirror, but a frantic hand grabbed my elbow, spinning me around. It was Vivian, my mother. She had abandoned her husband in handcuffs and her son on the floor to chase after the only thing she ever truly loved, which was access to wealth. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and her mascara was smeared down her cheeks, but her eyes were locked on the diamond choker at my throat with a terrifying hunger. "Nia, baby. Wait!" She panted out of breath from running in her heels across the cobblestones. "You cannot just leave like this. We need to talk. Why did you not tell us? Why did you let us think you were poor all this time? I knew it. I always told Marcus you were the special one. I told him you were destined for greatness. You are my daughter after all. You get that brilliance from me." I stopped and looked at her, stunned by the sheer velocity of her pivot. 5 minutes ago, I was the ungrateful stepdaughter who needed to be humbled. I was the failure who embarrassed the family with my cheap clothes. Now that she knew I was a billionaire, I was suddenly the special one. She was trying to claim credit for the success she had actively tried to sabotage for decades. She gripped my arm tighter, her fake nails digging into the white silk of my custom suit, desperate to establish a physical connection that might translate into a financial one. "You have to help him, Nia," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, trying to create an intimate bubble around us. "I know you are angry. You have every right to be. Marcus can be foolish sometimes. He makes mistakes. But he is your father. He raised you when your own father was not there. He put a roof over your head. He is an old man, Nia. He has high blood pressure and a bad heart. He cannot survive in federal prison. It will kill him." She squeezed my arm, shaking me slightly to emphasize her point. "You have so much money now. I saw the appraisal. I heard the lawyer. You are rich, rich. This amount of money is nothing to you. It is just a rounding error. You can fix this. You can pay the fines. You can tell the police it was a family dispute, and you do not want to press charges. You can make it all go away. Please, baby, do it for mommy. Do not let them take him away. Do not destroy this family over money." She was using every weapon in her arsenal: guilt, flattery, the biological bond. She was banking on the fact that somewhere inside the CEO standing before her, there was still a little girl desperate for her mother approval. She thought she could trade a few empty compliments for a get-out-of-jail-free card. She ignored the fact that Marcus had stolen my tuition. She ignored the fact that she had forged my signature on a legal deed. She ignored the fact that Darius was destitute inside the hotel. All she saw was a checkbook, and she was willing to say anything to get me to open it. She looked at me with those wide, teary eyes, expecting me to crumble, expecting me to save the monster she had chosen over me. She really believed that the title of mother was a blank check she could cash whenever she was in trouble. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me standing there in the flickering light of the valet stand. Her mascara was running in dark streaks down her face, and her hands were still reaching out for me as if I were a life raft in a storm she had helped create. For 32 years I had wanted nothing more than for her to choose me. I had wanted her to defend me against Marcus, to value my dreams over Darius' comfort, and to see me as something other than a utility. Now she was finally looking at me with the intensity I had always craved, but it was hollow. She was not looking at her daughter with love. She was looking at a billionaire with calculation. She did not want to heal our relationship. She wanted to refinance her lifestyle. I slowly peeled her fingers off the sleeve of my white silk jacket. I did not shove her. I just removed her grip with the same dispassionate care one might use to remove a burr from clothing. I smoothed the fabric where she had clutched me, erasing the physical trace of her desperation. I stepped back, creating a distance that was measured in inches but felt like miles. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet and devoid of the anger she expected. "You need to listen to me very carefully because I am never going to have this conversation with you again. You are standing here asking me for mercy. You are asking me to use my money to fix the mess that your husband created. But you seem to have forgotten your own role in this tragedy." She opened her mouth to interrupt, to spin another story about how she was just a helpless bystander, but I cut her off with a sharp look that silenced her instantly. "Do not lie to me. Not lie to. Not tonight. You signed the deed. Marcus told me himself. He said women handle the pen. You walked into a notary office, you pretended to be me, and you forged my signature on a legal document to sell my property. In the eyes of the law, that does not make you a victim. It makes you a co-conspirator. It makes you a felon." Vivian's face went ashen, the rouge standing out starkly against her pale skin. She took a stumbling step back, her hand flying to her throat. My lawyer Julian reviewed the case file. I continued, my eyes locking onto hers. "He pushed for a dual indictment. He wanted to charge you with fraud and aggravated identity theft right alongside Marcus. The evidence is irrefutable. You are on camera. You are on the documents. By all rights, you should be in the back of that police cruiser right now, heading to a federal holding cell." She let out a small whimper, trembling in the cool night air. But I stopped him. I looked at the prosecutors and I asked for leniency. I told them you were coerced. I told them you did not understand what you were signing. I lied for you, Mom. I used my influence to keep your name off the warrant. I saved you from prison tonight. That is the help you are asking for. That is the only thing I am going to give you. You have your freedom. You are not going to jail. That is my final gift to you." I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes, followed immediately by the return of greed. "But Nia," she stammered. "The house. The bills. How am I supposed to live? Marcus is gone. What about money?" I shook my head slowly, a sad smile touching my lips. "That is not my problem anymore. I saved you from a cage, but I am not going to save you from the consequences of your life. You chose him. You chose the lies. You chose the image over the reality. Now you have to live in the world you built. Do not call me. Do not come to my office. Do not look for me. I am not your retirement plan. I am the daughter you sold for a new car, and I am finally closing the account." I turned my back on my mother, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, under the flickering gas lamps of the hotel entrance. Her voice continued to chase me, a desperate, keening sound that floated on the night air, begging for money and forgiveness, but I did not slow my pace. My heels clicked a steady rhythm against the pavement, a cadence of finality that echoed the beating of my own heart. For years I had walked on eggshells around these people, afraid to disturb their fragile egos or trigger their cruelty. Now I walked with the heavy, confident stride of a woman who had burned the bridge and was delighted by the light of the flames. The valet was waiting for me, holding the door of my Porsche Panamera open. The car was jet black, gleaming like a dark jewel under the streetlights. It was a machine built for power and precision, purchased with money I had earned through sleepless nights and relentless work. It was not a status symbol bought with stolen funds to impress strangers. It was a tool of my liberation. I tipped the valet $100 bill, not to show off, but because I appreciated competence, something my family sorely lacked. He nodded respectfully and closed the heavy door behind me. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It sealed out the humidity of the Atlanta night. It sealed out the sirens approaching in the distance. And most importantly, it sealed out the toxic demands of the woman claiming to be my mother. Inside the cabin of the car, the silence was absolute. The smell of hand-stitched leather and the soft glow of the instrument panel created a sanctuary that felt safer than any home I had ever known. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the vibration of the engine purring beneath my hands. It was a beast, waiting to be unleashed, just like the truth I had revealed on that stage. I glanced up at the rearview mirror one last time. I could still see Vivian standing near the entrance, a small, pathetic figure in a dress that was trying too hard to be elegant. She looked lost. She looked like a child waiting for a parent to come back and fix a broken toy. But I was not her parent, and she was not a child. She was a grown woman who had made a lifetime of selfish choices. Seeing her shrinking in the distance, I waited for the wave of guilt to hit me. I waited for the sadness, the regret, the familiar pang of longing for a family that loved me. But the wave never came. Instead, I felt a physical sensation of lightness spreading through my chest. It was as if a 1,000-pound weight had been unstrapped from my shoulders. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach since I was 10 years old uncoiled and dissolved. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, filtered air, and realized I was smiling. It was not a smile of malice or revenge. It was the smile of the prisoner who had just walked out of the gates after a life sentence. I shifted the car into drive and pressed my foot against the accelerator. The Porsche surged forward, leaving the curb and the hotel and the wreckage of the Wilson family behind. I merged into the traffic flowing toward the highway, moving forward into a future that finally belonged to me. The dismantling of the Wilson dynasty happened with the same brutal efficiency as a controlled demolition. It did not take years. It took exactly 30 days for the dust to settle on the ruins of their lives. Marcus was currently residing in the Fulton County Jail awaiting trial. His bail hearing had been a disaster. The judge, citing the overwhelming evidence of flight risk and the sheer scale of the fraud, denied bond. The man who had spent a lifetime chasing the spotlight was finally the center of attention, but his audience was now a cellmate named Razor and a court-appointed attorney who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The Mercedes was gone, seized by the state. The suits were gone, traded for an orange jumpsuit that did fit, but in all the wrong ways. He was alone with his thoughts, and for a man like Marcus, that was a punishment worse than any physical confinement. My mother's fate was less dramatic, but equally devastating. The foreclosure notice on the Colonial House arrived 3 days after the arrest. It turned out Marcus had leveraged the property to the hilt, taking out multiple second mortgages to fund his gambling addiction. The bank did not care about her tears or her social standing. They cared about the lien. She was given 30 days to vacate. I heard through the grapevine that she was moving into a small one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she used to drive through with her doors locked. Her friends, the women she had lunched with for decades, had vanished. Her phone stopped ringing. The social capital she had hoarded was revealed to be as worthless as the fake diamonds she wore. Amber didn't even wait for the ink to dry on the arrest warrant. She filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, which was legal speak for he is broke. She packed her bags and moved back in with her parents, leaving behind a scathing interview in a local tabloid where she painted herself as the victim of a con artist family. She conveniently forgot to mention her own greed, her own cruelty. She simply washed her hands of the wreckage and walked away looking for the next host to latch onto. And Darius, my little brother, the aspiring crypto tycoon, found his own level. Without his father's protection or my mother's enabling, he was forced to face the reality of the labor market. I saw him once from a distance. I was stopped at a traffic light in Buckhead, and I looked over at the patio of a mid-range chain restaurant. He was there wearing a stained apron clearing tables. He looked tired. He looked humbled. He looked like a man who finally understood the value of a dollar because he had to earn it the hard way. I didn't roll down my window. I didn't wave. I just watched him work for a moment, a silent acknowledgement that justice had been served. Then the light turned green, and I drove away, leaving him to his new life. I had cut the cord. I had blocked the numbers. I had erased them from my digital and physical existence. They were no longer my burden. They were just characters in a story I had finished writing. I stood on the edge of the ridge looking out over the vast expanse of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The air up here was thin and clean crisp, with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It felt nothing like the recycled air of the courtroom or the heavy, perfumed atmosphere of the St. Regis ballroom. This was the land my grandfather had bought with his own hands. This was the dirt that Marcus had sold for the price of a car. This was the asset that had torn my family apart and revealed them for the wolves they were. Julian stood beside me holding a leather portfolio against the hood of his car. He looked out at the view and then down at the papers. "Are you sure about this, Nia?" he asked quietly. "The developers called again this morning. They upped the offer to $4.5 million. You could take the cash and walk away. You could build a mansion here that would overlook the entire state." I looked at the papers. It was a transfer of deed, but not to a corporation and not to a bank. I took the pen from his pocket. "I do not need a mansion, Julian. And I certainly do not need their money. If I sell this land to them, I am just finishing what Marcus started. I am just liquidating history for profit." I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. With that signature, I transferred the ownership of the entire $4 million parcel to a non-profit trust I had established that morning. "It is done," I said, handing the portfolio back. "Construction starts next month." Julian looked at the document and smiled. "The Vivian Center for Women and Children. Your mother is going to be furious when she sees her name on a building she cannot enter." I shook my head, looking at the old cabin structure that still stood nearby. "It is not named after her, Julian. It is named after my grandmother, the original Vivian Wilson. The woman who taught me to read, and who told me that my worth was not determined by my bank account. She was the only person in that family who ever loved me unconditionally. My mother stole her name just like she tried to steal this land. I am taking it back. This center will be a sanctuary for women escaping financial abuse, women who need to rebuild their lives just like I did. It is the legacy my grandfather would have wanted." I walked over to my Porsche, the gravel crunching under my boots. I did not look back at the view. I did not need to own the view to appreciate it. I had saved it from being turned into a casino, and that was enough. I slid into the driver's seat and tossed my sunglasses onto the dashboard. I checked my phone one last time. 0 missed calls, 0 unread messages. My block list was full, and my conscience was clear. I started the engine and the car purred to life, a deep, throaty sound that promised speed and distance. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The angry girl who had flown back from Ghana seeking revenge was gone. The cold executive who had destroyed her stepfather in a ballroom was gone. Staring back at me was just Nia. I was free from their debts, free from their expectations, and free from their drama. I shifted into gear and pressed the accelerator. As the car surged forward down the winding mountain road, chasing the dying light of the sun, I finally allowed myself to smile. It was over, and my life was just beginning. The most profound lesson here is that silence is not weakness. It is preparation. Marcus and his family were so blinded by vanity that they underestimated the very person they tried to exploit. They learned too late that real wealth whispers while debt screams. Nia proves that you do not need to argue with those committed to misunderstanding you. The best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own greed while you thrive. Never let your value be defined by people who cannot afford to appreciate you. Sometimes walking away is the ultimate power move. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to find your own peace? I want to hear your story in the comments below. If you believe in justice, served cold, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience.